Okay, so I've got a question for you. Have you ever wondered what it physically takes to design a mobile app? Well, in this video, we're going to do exactly that. We are going to design an all-in-one flight app, and we are going to use Figma and auto layout to achieve all of that. And on top of that, I've already created the wireframes for us to work off of. This is going to make life so much easier. And I've also published this design on the Figma community, so you can physically fork or duplicate this design and do whatever you want with it. Okay, now with all that said, this video is perfect for anyone that's a beginner and even a pro. You can definitely learn something off of it, and drop in the description below if there's anything that I go over too fast. If you want me to explain anything, you can definitely do so. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. I do post videos like this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It's all about design, it's all about development, and everything and anything in between. So with that, let's get things going. Alright, so what you're seeing on the screen is a couple of wireframes. So I created this wireframes prior to doing this video just to speed up a bit of time. Now, a few things. I have put this actual wireframe and the entire design on the Figma community, so you can literally just take this and duplicate it, and you can use it throughout this actual course that we are doing, or this tutorial, whatever you want to call it. Now, zooming in, we have two artboards. We have search and we have ticket. On search itself, I have just a few boxes that I've put together. And with a wireframe, you don't want to be too complicated, but you also want to give the developer or any type of manager that's going to view this the ability to see your overall spec. So what I have here is at the top, you'll see I have a huge space here. And when you look or press the little play button, you'll see the reason I have that space is to accommodate for the actual nudge of the iPhone itself, or any type of other device for that matter. But we're going to focus on the iPhone itself. Now, with that, I have 4 boxes, and the idea here is that we are going to create a couple of buttons here where you can search for a flight, you can search for a hotel or a car rental, and so forth. The next part is we are going to add, is it going to be a one-way, is it going to be return, or is it going to be multi-city, right? So we always want to have the user to have that ability to choose that. Next, we are going to do the from and the to, including the date as well. So having the from, meaning which airport am I going to leave from and what airport am I going to? And the date, obviously, date is pretty obvious. Next, we are going to have traveler, economy, luggage. So extra little settings that will pop up. And then, of course, the big button, the search flight button. Below that, I was thinking, you know what? Let's add a section that is showing any upcoming flights. So that's kind of what this section is going to be. And then at the bottom, we are going to have our actual navigation. So that would be the first wireframe that we're going to work on. So we're going to take these wireframes and we're going to take search, we're going to take ticket. We are going to convert this into a beautiful app. Now, just to quickly run you through the second one. The second one is the actual ticket, and this is self-explanatory. So I already have a beautiful QR code. So as always, we want to give that ability for the user to have the ticket ready when they board the plane. And a couple of things here, it's showing where we're going. So it's going to Cape Town. Where we're coming from is going to be Calgary, as well as the gate and a couple of other things that I've put together, what class, what seat, what date. So when you look at the entire wireframe, this specific ticket, this is all the stuff we need to make sure it's a beautiful looking ticket. So let's get going. A couple of things just quickly before we jump into it is the spacing. So you'll notice when you duplicate or fork this design, you are going to notice that I'm not using auto layout for the wireframes itself. The reason for that is flexibility and creativity. But moving forward, putting together this actual design, we are going to use the auto layout feature. Why? Because it really speeds up our entire design process. All right, so with all that, let's jump into it. Let's get going. Okay, first things first, I am going to click on the frame tool and we are going to select the iPhone option. And I'm just going to drag it so that it is aligned with the rest of them. And we are going to rename it, and I'm going to call it search. And by the way, drop in the comments below what your thoughts are on the naming conventions of Figma itself. And not just naming conventions, about groups and layers. I would love to know your insight on that. All right, so with that, let's activate auto layout. I'm going to select the search artboard and we are going to activate auto layout. And one thing I do want to make sure when activating auto layout on a frame itself is we want to make sure that the horizontal resizing and the vertical resizing for that matter is set to fixed. If you don't do that, the actual frame is going to start moving about when you start adding items. All right, with that, we are adding the first bit. So these two little circles, my idea here is to have a couple of icons. So let's start off with that. The first thing I want to do is click on resources. I want to go to plugins, and we are going to use material symbols. So this is Google's version of icons. I've been using it. If you've been following me on YouTube, I have been using this quite a bit, and I just find that it is quite great. It's a great solution or a great tool to use throughout the design process. So the first item that I want to add, or the first icon I want to add, is a menu. So let's search for menu. And to be honest, I don't really like these. So let's try and search for maybe dots. Maybe we can find something that looks better when we use dots. You know what? I'm going to go for this. It's a pretty standard icon to use, so I'm going to go for this one. Now with that, it is going to import it into the Figma design, but it's not necessarily going to drop it into the artboard. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to drop it into the artboard, and now it's dropped it in the artboard, but not where we want it. So to solve this issue, we're going to group this item, and I'm just going to call it maybe header, and we can start there. The next thing, I want to change the color a little bit. So I want to up the color just a slight bit. We are not using a UI kit. By the way, if you want to learn how to use a Bootstrap UI kit while designing, check out the video at the top. I do show exactly how to do that. Okay, with this done, we will open up header, and we want to select the group, or the icon for that matter, and group it again. The reason why we want to group it again is because I want to activate auto layout on it. And I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it menu. And I am going to take a border radius of 500. The reason I want a border radius of 500 is because I want to mimic an actual ellipse or a circle. Now with that done, before we do anything else, I want to duplicate or replicate this background that we have here. We want to take this and add a background image just so that we have a little bit more of a depth in this app design. So with that, we will take the rectangle tool. I'm just going to drag it in, and I'm going to shape it and move it about. And one thing I want to do is I want to set it to absolute because I don't want auto layout to control this at all. And we are going to just move it down to about here just to match what I've already done in the wireframe. And this is, by the way, the reason why wireframes is so important. All right, now with that done, we want to take this rectangle tool, rename it. I'm going to call it background. And once it's renamed, I want to right click and I want to send it to the back because I don't want it to overlap the rest of the items. Okay, now that we've done that, the next thing, we're going to use a plugin, and we are going to add a image to this rectangle. So I'm going to open up a plugin that I use. By the way, I'll drop it in the description of this video, all the plugins I'm using and all the good links. But this Unsplash is just a quick plugin that I can use to get an image in my design. So I don't need to open up a browser. I don't need to search a different type of image. I can just get it right here. Okay, so with that, we are going to search for a specific image. And you know what? I'm going to go for an image of Calgary just because that is the actual airport that was selected for the user to search with. And we're just going to go with that. So I am just going to click on this one. This one looks pretty good. At this point, we do have a background. Now that we've done that, I want to take our ellipse or our menu. We just want to style this in. So I am going to add a fold to it. And there you can see the reason why I did the 500 on the border radius on the right-hand side is because I want that ellipse look and feel. Now, one thing though, is when I go and play this, just to have a quick look, obviously the actual dots are a little too big and the ellipse itself is a little too small. So let's modify that a little bit. I am going to open up the icon itself, and I want to make sure that I select that one. And let's change this to perhaps 20. And once we've changed that, let's add a little bit of padding within our auto layout. So I'm going to add about 6, and we're going to add about 6. Maybe a little bit more. Let's go for 8 and 8. Now, the other thing I want to do is because it's an ellipse, we want to change our spacing or our alignments, or even for that matter, our resizing to be fixed. And I'm going to change that to 35 by 35. So let's have a look at how that looks like. That looks pretty good. That looks really good. I just want to make sure that it properly aligns in the center. Now, here's one thing. If you've been following me, you do know that I say this a lot. Alignment and spacing with any type of design you do is absolutely critical, because if your alignment or your spacing is not a 100%, it's just not good. Trust me. That's where you definitely see a beginner versus a pro when it comes to design. So with that, make sure that your spacing alignment within your design is 110%. Now I want to take this and I want to move it to the right. So there is a couple of options here. Now, first off, in our wireframe, we do have two icons. And we do have some content on the left-hand side as well. So the idea that I had here is we do have our menu. So I'm going to take this right here. I'm going to duplicate that. But you're going to notice when you duplicate that is it actually duplicated the whole header. So obviously we don't want that. We want the menu item itself to be duplicated. So we're going to duplicate that. And then we're going to take header and activate auto layout. And we are going to change the layout to horizontal, and I want to give it a little spacing. So I'm going to give it a spacing of 25. All right. So now with that done, I want to check the spacing that I used in my wireframe. So I've been using 25 on the sides. Now with that, we want to adjust our artboard's padding just a slight bit. So I'm going to click on the artboard and we will change the horizontal and vertical padding. I'm going to start with the vertical. We're going to change that to maybe 25, start there, as well as horizontal start at 25. Now, obviously, as I said in the beginning, we do need this space as well for the notch of the iPhone itself. So to do that, we're going to click on the artboard and we will break out the top and bottom padding and change the top to 65. Now we have that space. So when we navigate, we can see we have that beautiful space. All right. So with that done, the next step is I want to change the second one. I want to change this actual menu item. We're going to change that. We're going to say profile. And within that, because it's set to fix and because it's 35, I can literally go and remove what is within. And the reason I want to do that is because I want a profile picture on this. So using Unsplash again, we are going to search for profile picture. Let's start there. Maybe that will work. And there we go. We have a profile picture. I'm just going to select her. I'm going to add that in. I'm just going to modify just a slight bit. So clicking on image itself, change the fill to crop. And the reason for that is because I just want to move her down a little bit. And there we go. We have her. Have a quick look at the view. It's getting there. It's looking good. All right. Now the next step is we want to take this and get it to the right-hand side of our artboard. To do that, we do need to add the items on the left-hand side. So my idea here is I want some text. So we're going to take our text tool and we're going to drop that in. And the text I want to do is welcome back. Now I am just going to use Enter, which is the default font. I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual font itself, but I want to set that to regular for now. And let's set this to 18. All right. So now with the font set to 18, we obviously need to add it into our header auto layout component. So taking our welcome back and we're just going to drag it in there. Now it's in there, but it's not 100% great yet. But before we start moving about or messing about with the spacing or alignment for this one, I want to take this text tool again and literally duplicate it. And let's change it to where would you like to go? I think that is a pretty good one. Now that done, we're going to select both text tools and we're going to group it and activate auto layout. We're going to change the horizontal layout to vertical, and I'm going to change this gap to 0. And we might play around with this a little bit, maybe change it to about 4. Now with that change to 4, we're going to take the where would you like to go? We're going to change that. I'm going to change that to 12 so it's nice and small. And I might maybe play around with light. Let's see. And while I'm doing that, let's take welcome back and let's change that to medium. All right. So now that we have that, we have our base. So we have the font on the left-hand side. So I'm going to rename the font. I'm just going to call it font for that matter. Again, you can fork this, duplicate this design and change it to whatever you like. All right. So now with that done, we're going to take our header and we are going to make sure that it is centered. And the other thing I want to do before I do this, I want to take the menu and profile, group that together again, activate auto layout, because we're going to go back to header and change the 25 to auto. And once you've changed it to auto, there is one small thing I need to do because nothing has really changed. We want to change this fixed and we want to make sure that it's false. So now you can see that we have welcome back, where would you like to go? And we have our menu and our icon. Now, one thing I do want to change, I feel like this spacing here is a little too much. So let's change that from 25. Let's change that to 15. And now to really blend this in, we need to play around with the image colors, just because at this stage, it's hard to read. It doesn't look good. So to do that, we are going to click on our background, which is right there. And I'm just going to get rid of this gray because we don't need the gray. Now we're going to play around with the image. Now, one thing I do want to do is bring down the exposure a little bit and up the contrast. Now, that's one important thing. If you really want an image to pop, you want to play around with the contrast and as well as the temperature. So I want more of a blue tone to this actual image. And the other thing is I want to bring down the shadows. You're not going to see much of it, but we just slightly want to bring that down. Now that we've done that, I am going to add another full item. I'm going to change this full item to 100, which is going to make it black. That's fine. But when we click on it, I want to add a gradient. And the reason for that is because I want a gradient effect in the background image itself. This is just going to give it a more dynamicy and flexibility that I'm really looking for. So going for all black, and now I'm going to bring down, I'm going to select the second gradient option, which is the bottom one, get that opacity down, see how that would look like, maybe about till there, and take this opacity and bring it down as well. So perhaps about there should be good. Now we're getting somewhere. Now it's looking good. All right. Now that we've done that, the next step is I want to take this text color and I want to change that to white. So now that we look at that again, we can see, okay, that's looking like something. It's looking okay. One thing I do want to do though is welcome back. I feel like that is a little too small. So let's change that. Let's take the welcome back and let's change that to 21, maybe even 24. Let's see how 24 looks like. Now, usually when I physically design for a client or for a customer, I would use a UI kit or predefined fonts because once you go into development, that process would be much easier. But for simplicity purposes and for this actual video, we're just going to play around with the font until we can get it to look good. All right, so it's saying, where would you like to go? And it's saying welcome back, but I still feel like this is not well balanced. So I'm going to make this one a tiny bit smaller, 11px, which I am now kind of going into the hard to read part. I'm going to go back to 12. I am going to change this to 26 just so that I can have a separation between the two fonts. Now that I've done that, I want to increase the gap between them just a slight bit. So maybe change it to 6. Let's see how 6 looks like. That looks pretty good. Last thing I want to do is I just want to change the medium and let's see how bold would look like. That might be too much. Actually, that looks good. That looks pretty good. All right, so now we have the welcome back. We have where would you like to go. The next part of our wireframe is we want to create these boxes. So to create these boxes, I want to minimize everything in my layers. Now, one little tip I can give you is always make sure that you do categorize and organize your layers and your groups and make sure that you name them. Especially when the design starts getting big, you want to make sure you're on top of that. All right, so with that, the idea that I have here is we want to add flight, hotel, and whatever else we want to add here. So let's start with the icon. I do want to use an icon, so I'm going to use material, and we're going to search for plane. All right, looking at that, I do like this icon the most, so I'm going to select that one. Once we've selected it, again, it's not going to drop it into the artboard itself. So we're going to take it, we're going to drop it into the artboard. But it's going to drop it right at the top, so I want to drag it to the bottom, and now we can see it's right there. Once we have our icon, now we're going to group it, and we're going to activate auto layout. I am going to play around. I think I selected a border radius of 12, which we are going to work with. So going back to it, we are going to select that newly created auto layout and we will change that to 12. Next, I want to give it some padding and spacing. So let's try 25. That might be too much. We're going to activate a full. Actually, that looks really, really good. So we do have our icon, but one thing though is I'm going to decrease the padding to 20. As you can see, I'm very particular when it comes to my designs. I want to make sure that the padding and spacing is 110%. The next thing is we want to set the spacing between these items. Now, the easiest way to do this is we are, once again, going to group it. So I'm going to take these layers on the left-hand side, just going to rename it. I'm going to rename it to row. Activate, yeah, you got it, auto layout. And we're going to change this to 25. So looking back at our design, I just want to make sure is that the padding I went for. Actually, I went for 47, which if you are using Bootstrap, you would know that that is space number 5. And if you want to learn more about Bootstrap, I just dropped a link in the video. you can learn a little bit more about Bootstrap. But this is more for mobile app development, which of course you won't be able to use Bootstrap, but following the basics of spacing and alignments when it comes to Bootstrap would definitely help you when you develop for something else. All right, so we do have the plane. I want to play around with how it would look like if we add a text box. It's not needed, but let's see. So let's add flight. Got to make sure that you select it, change it to regular, change it to 12, and let's get this to be underneath each other. And I want to make sure that it's centered. See, I kind of like it, but I don't like it at the same time. I think we can play around with this. I want to take this icon, maybe change the icon to 30, change the color of the icon. I want this a little lighter, maybe a little bit more to the blue side, about there. And now once that's done, I want to decrease our padding that we liked. I don't like it anymore. I want to change that a little bit. But one thing now, you're going to see that the width is more than the height. I don't like that. So we do want to fine tune this just a slight bit. I'm going to change the vertical gap to 6. And now I want to get this actual box to have a consistent width and height. So we have 62 and 75. So let's go with 62. I do like 62. So decreasing your padding top and bottom, we're going to play around, and you can see here at the top, my height is decreasing and I want to go for 8.5. Now our width and our height is matching, which is good. That is exactly what I want. Okay, so now looking at it, we're almost there. One thing that's bugging me right now is this spacing here, the spacing here, and the spacing here. It's not properly matching. So let's go and just fine tune this a little bit. So I'm going to change this one to 6. And the bottom one, let's change that to 11. Perfect. I really like that. So let's have a quick view. That looks pretty good. We're obviously going to fine tune it as we go throughout the design. I do feel like this might still be a little small, but we'll get back to it once we fine tune the entire design. All right, so with that, we're going to take this icon and we're going to rename it. So I'm just going to call it icon for now, and we're going to duplicate it because we already created it. We don't have to recreate it. We're going to take this and we're going to group it again, and we're going to activate auto layout, and I'm going to rename this to row. All right, so now with it renamed, we're going to take the horizontal layout option, and here you can see that, okay, cool. We do have 2 of them. Now we can take it and we can just duplicate it. Now going back to our actual physical wireframe, we want to make sure that it looks very similar to what I already have. Okay, so obviously you can see that this is much bigger. So when I select that, it's 80 by 80, which we are playing around with 60, I think 62. So you know what? I said that we're going to do it later on. Let's do it now because it's going to definitely save us some time. So I'm going to go for fixed. We are going to change this to 82 by 82. Because we went for fixed, we have a little bit more control. So padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right, it is not needed anymore, which is fine. Now that we have that, we can duplicate it, and duplicate it. And now once it's duplicated, the reason why it's going off the artboard or off our frame is because the width of row is set to hug. So we want to set it to full. And it's still not doing exactly what I wanted to do. Let's see why. So I think the reason why it's doing that is because we have a default set of horizontal gap of 48. We want to set that to auto. And there you go. Now you can see that it has beautifully put it right next to each other, and it has that default spacing and it's set to auto. Now looking at it, yeah, that looks really good. The next thing, we have flight. So I'm going to change this. We're just going to change that to flights, plural. And the next one, we're going to say hotels. The next one, car. And the last one, vacation, because maybe that could be a vacation package, right? Now with that all done, we need to change the icon. So I'm going to select the icon itself, make sure I select it. We're going to open up material symbols again. Now we're going to search for hotels. I don't think we're going to find anything that's going to look good. So I am going to go for building. Let's see how building looks like. And I really like this one. That looks good. Or actually, I'm going to go with this one. Let's go with that one. All right, so because we're using material designs and because we selected the actual layer, you'll see that it will automatically replace that icon for us, which is pretty cool. We don't have to go and respace or resize or anything like that. But one thing though is we do need to change the color. So clicking on the color on the right-hand side, I'm just going to match it with the other one, and that is done. So let's select our next one, make sure we have the layer selected, We're going to search for car. Let's see what car brings up. It doesn't really bring anything up that I like. I'm going to be honest. We've got a motorcycle. Motorcycle looks good, but that's not normally what people search for or rank for when they go on vacation or where they do anything else. So let's see what happens when we do vehicle. Maybe we can get a side view. And because we're not getting anything, I'm just going to go with this one. But let's go for film. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. I like that. All right. So again, we want to make sure that we match our color. So I'm going to click on my color tool. We're going to match it right there. Perfect. Okay. So now that that's done, we need to do the last one, which is vacation. Let's see what happens if we search beach. I do like this. Let's go for this one. And let's see how full looks like. Yeah, that looks okay. That looks good. All right, so now that we have that icon, I'm going to change the color, and there we go. Now, looking at our play or our view mode, we can see we do have our icons. We do have everything. It looks good. We can always fine tune as we go through the design, but this stage, it looks pretty darn good. All right, so with that, the next step, we're going to start with this section right here. So the idea that I have here is that I want the user to have the ability to select either one way or return flight or multi-city. So let's start off with just minimizing everything here. And I'm going to take the text tool. We're just going to drop it in and we're going to say return flight. And once that's done, we're going to take this, just going to group it, activate auto layout. Now that we have auto layout, let's see what we can do. So one thing I do want to do is I want to give it a background full. So I'm going to activate full. And we're going to play around. We're going to play around with padding 6. And within that, I want to take this text and I just want the text to match our color that we already have. And once that's done, we do have our return flight, but it's not 100% there yet. So I'm going to go back and see what kind of radius I used. I used 6px. I'm going to use 6px right here. And we're going to change this guy to medium or maybe bold. Let's see. For now, I'm just going to leave it at medium. And we're going to take this guy and we will duplicate it again. And we're going to change return flight to single flight. Then the last one is multi-city. Now, one thing you're going to notice is with Figma, once you've duplicated any type of font, you're going to notice that the width needs to be reset. To do that, we just want to click on it and select the auto width option. I'm going to do the same for the other one as well. If you don't do that, it does get a little tricky later on. All right, so now that we have our items here, I'm going to take this frame that we have and I'm just going to change it to row or rename it to row for that matter. And now with that done, I'm going to fill it. We want to make sure that our gap is set to auto. Okay, so now that we have something, it looks pretty good. I just want to check the font size. Font size is 12, which is it's getting small. Just want to keep an eye on that as we're designing. But one thing I do want to do is I'm going to take this, group it again, activate auto layout. This doesn't matter the actual gap because we're not going to have anything in there, but I'm going to activate fill. I'm going to give it just a slight, maybe F1 would look good. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And we're just going to give it a bit of a padding. So I'm going to give it 12 and 12. And we can see that, oh, wait, what's happening now? And that's the fix. So we want to make sure that we set that to hug, make sure that both are set to hug. And we're going to give it a radius of 6. So let's see how that looks like. That looks okay. It's not 100% there yet. One thing I do want to do is just change the padding left and padding right to 15 and maybe decrease this one just a slight bit, maybe to 10 and see how that looks like. Yeah, we're almost there. One thing I do want to do is I want to change this to bold and see how that would look like. Bold is a little too much, but with that, now that I'm here, I'm going to take these font sizes and just up it a little bit, maybe to 14. Just want to see how that looks like. It's looking pretty rough shape right now, but we're going to fine tune this. I'm going to take the bold and bring it back to medium and just see how that looks like. We have a good start here. Now I want to make sure that we align the rest of them. There's two things you can do here. You can either kind of mess about with the alignment to get it properly set, or the other thing you can do, and it's a little bit repetitive, but it does pay off on the long run, is you want to take the one that we just created and just duplicate it. And we're going to change this to single flight and change this one again to multi city. Perfect. So there we go. We have it kind of almost where we want. I just want to change the width to full, take the multi-city and change that to full as well. And now the gap is going to be important. So instead of auto, we're just going to change that to 10. All right. So now going back to our design, we have return flight, single flight, and multi-city. But one thing I do want to do is I want to just turn this off for now. We can always get back to it, always come back to it, which is something we can always do with a design, right? Want to make sure that this is centered aligned. Just have a quick look at that. We can definitely go and change the color of the background later on. Okay, so with that, in the next chapter, we are going to create this search functionality. So make sure to stick around. Again, everything is in the description below. And while you're at it, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button and drop a comment below. And the question I have for you is, do you like auto layout in Figma? Or are you a traditional designer where you like to physically play around with the spacing? Drop it in the comments. I would love to know what you think. All right, so next up, we're going to create that search functionality. All right, so welcome to chapter 2. Chapter 2, as I said, we are going to focus on that search functionality. We're going to put that together. Now you're going to notice as we go through this entire design, we are going to fine tune some spacing and padding. And the reason I'm saying that is because I noticed that the icon of the profile picture isn't 100% because it kind of blends in with the background itself. So there's still a few things that we will be fine tuning as we go through this entire tutorial. All right. Previous chapter, we finished off with return flight, single flight, multi-flight. And again, we will be fine-tuning this as we're going through. All right, next step, we will be creating this from, to, and date. So basically the search functionality of our mobile app. So first things first, we want to go back to the search and minimize everything that's within. So we have one row which has everything that we created, and we have another row which has this return flight and so forth. First thing I want to do is have a look at what we need. So we do need the from and we do need the to. So let's start off with the text itself. I am going to take the text tool. We're going to drop that in. Now you may ask yourself, why are you starting from the text? Now, one thing that I can recommend, doing this for quite a while, is when using auto layout, you always want to start from in and move out. Meaning you start from the inner content and you move to the outer content. It just makes life so much easier if you do it that way. The first thing that we want to type in is from. So let's start with from. I'm just going to type from just like that. And with that, I'm going to duplicate this text again. And we are going to go for Calgary, AB, Canada. So I am, just to kind of save time, I'm going to copy what I already did in the wireframe. And that's one thing you can do as well as a designer, as reuse stuff that you already created in your wireframe. Now, do I always use a wireframe? And drop in the comments below if you are a designer that uses wireframes. And I'm going to tell you 99% of the time, I don't use wireframes just because I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm so used to just putting stuff together. But in this case, I wanted to go with the wireframe approach. All right, so now that we have the Calgary right there, one thing I do want to do is I do want to change its color. And this is something that we can do later on as well. The same with the from. I want to do the same thing for the from as well. I want to select our color picker and drop that in. So we do have our from, and we're going to take these two text items. We're going to group that together. And as always, we're going to activate auto layout. Now that we've activated auto layout, I do want to decrease the spacing between them. So I'm going to change it to 6 for now. And with that, we do have the base for that now. So we have the from, Calgary, AB, Canada, YYC. The next thing is essentially creating that icon, which is going to be on the left-hand side. So the icon that I want to go for is the plane. I think the plane icon might be a good one for this. So let's search for the plane. Now I can just technically copy, not plane. I can technically copy the one that's at the top, but I want to use a different one. So let's use this one. Again, it's not dropping it right into our artboard or into our frame. So we do want to make sure that we drop it in where we need it. So it's right there. So when you do this, when you move an icon or anything into the artboard or into the frame, you're going to notice that sometimes the layers on the left-hand side is not, it just opens up random layers. So we're just going to minimize this, and I'm going to go back to where we are, which is right there. Now we will basically group this guy, and we're going to create a frame for it. And I'm going to create a full of white. And once I'm done with that, we're going to see which one or which border radius I kind of played off with in the wireframe. I think I used 6, which is consistent throughout the design. Always make sure that you are consistent with everything that you do within the actual design itself. Next, we're going to change that color. So I'm going to go and select this color. Oh, that is definitely not the color that I want. We're going to redo that and select the color. There we go. Perfect. With that done, we are going to go for a fixed approach on this one. So we're going to change both of our width and height to fixed, and we're going to make sure that it's centered. And let's go for 35. I might be too big, but hey, let's see what happens. All right, so we're going to change this frame that is an auto layout, or this group that's an auto layout. We're going to rename that one, and I'm just going to call it text for now. And the same with this one, we're going to say icon. Now with both of them done, we're going to select both of them. That's right, we're going to group it together and rename it to from input. And now that we've done that, activate auto layout, and we're going to change the orientation and make sure everything is centered. I'm also going to change the spacing on this one, 16. Have a quick look. This is kind of where we are right now, which kind of looks okay. We might need to play around with that icon size. It might be a little too big, but now that we've done that, we can change it. We can change up the fill for that matter. And let's have a look. So one thing that we do need to do is we do have a radius top and right. So top left and top right, but we don't have a radius at the bottom, or we have a very little radius at the bottom. So let's see what I did here. We did 8, 8 and 2, 2. So let's go do the same for this one as well. So we're going to change this to 8, this one to 8, and the bottom left and the bottom right, we're going to change to 2. Now that we have the basics, we can go and change the width of this. We can change it from hug. We can change that to fill. And now we got to play around with the padding just a little bit. So I'm going to go with 6 by default, and we can see how that looks like. Next, I want to change this fill. Let's change that to F1. And now that we've changed that to F1, we can have a quick peek. We can see that we have something here, and it's starting to look like something. It's starting to look good. And again, we're always fine-tune as we go. But one thing though is I want to play around with this font. So I want to increase the font on this one just a tiny bit. So maybe change that to 16 and change this one to a smaller one. Change that to regular, and the bigger one, let's change that to bold and see how that looks like. So that looks pretty good at this point. We might need to play around with the padding once again. Oh, I don't want to click there. Going back to the design, let's take this and let's duplicate exactly what we did here. So we're going to take from input and we're going to duplicate that. And now we just got to swap our border radius. So instead of having the 2 at the bottom left and bottom right, we're going to have the 2 at the top left and top right. Okay, so now we have our from. We're going to change this to 2. And we are going to change Calgary. Let's type this out. I'm going to say Cape Town. And obviously, play around, select a city or a country that you like. I like South Africa because that's where I'm originally from. For those that was wondering why I selected Cape Town, that's where I'm originally from, born and raised in Cape Town. All right, now that we have from and to, the next thing is we're going to take these 2 form inputs and we're going to group it together once again. Grouping and auto layout, you do that a lot. And that's, you can see as we go through this, this is why we work from in to out, because working from out to in is just an absolute nightmare. With that said, we're going to change this to perhaps 4 or maybe even 2. Let's go for 4. So let's change that to 4. The next thing I want to do is I want a little icon on the right hand side. And in the mockup design on the left hand side, you see I only have a little square. So we want a little icon in there so that the user can easily switch. So if they want to instead go from Cape Town to Calgary versus Calgary to Cape Town, they can easily do that. So to speed things up here, I'm going to take this icon right here. We're going to duplicate it. But instead of it being there, we're just going to move it up. And we want to make sure that it's still within this entire frame. But here's the catch. We are going to go for absolute positioning. So I'm going to click on absolute positioning and we will move it till about there. We're going to click on the icon itself. We're going to open up material design icon. And now we got to search for that icon that I want. So this might be a little tricky to find it. Actually, there it is. It's much easier than I thought it was going to be. And let's have a quick look at how that looks like. So I like the size of it. I just don't like the color. So let's change the color up a little bit. I am going to go for white for now. Now you might ask, why did you just do that? Because we're going to use a shadow to basically differentiate that, but we'll do that later on. One thing I do want to do is just change the color here real quick. And we're going to change that to this color. And we already did that for those two, but I don't really like the two plain icons. It just feels a little repetitive. So what I'm going to do is let's change the rotation on these just so that it kind of breaks the repetitiveness. So I'm going to change it to -45. So it looks like a plane that goes out. And we're going to change this one to 45 degrees. All right, just changing that real quick. And there we have it. It kind of looks a little different. And it kind of looks a little unique. Okay, so with that done, the next step is we want to create that date functionality. So very similar to what we already have, we're just going to reuse it. So I'm going to take my input, my form input, and we're going to duplicate this guy. We can always duplicate stuff to save time. This is quite crucial. Now that I've done that, we're going to just make sure that this is at the bottom. We have selected it. Everything looks good. And we are going to change that border radius. We're going to change everything to 8. So where it says mixed here, we can just change that to 8. And now we have our beautiful date input. Next up, I want to change this icon. So of course, we want to change that rotation to 0 again. And we're going to take material icon and we're going to search for calendar. Normally calendar is a good one. I'm going to turn on the full option and we are going to select, let's go for this one. This one looks okay for now. And we want to, again, change that color. So click, select the color picker and get that to change. All right, so now that we've done that, the next step is to actually add or change to. We want to change that obviously to dates. So we're going to change that to dates. And next up, we want to have the date option. So again, I'm just going to copy what I already did. If you fork or duplicate the design, you can do exactly what I'm doing right now, just to speed up time. We're going to drop that in. But one thing you're going to notice is that we still need to go and adjust the colors once again. So I'm going to go and adjust the color just a slight bit. And with that, we have the base up and running now. We have the base and it kind of looks pretty good. With that all said, we do want to change the spacing here. I do want a little bit of a separation here. To do that, we are going to select our first two form inputs and we are going to regroup it again, activate auto layout. It's automatically going to set it to 4, which is good. But now I want to go back to this, which I'm going to change to outer input. And we will increase this to perhaps 25. That spacing is a little too much. Let's see what I used in my wireframe. And it's not telling me what is the spacing, which is very frustrating. But to solve this, I can just quickly do that. And it looks like we used 12. So we are going to use 12 in this spacing. So changing this to 12, just to kind of give it a little separation to make sure that the user can see the difference between the two. All right, so now with this done, the outer input, we want to add a background color to. So I'm going to add a full and we are going to leave it at white. So we do need to go and modify a few things here to make sure that it actually blends in properly. But before we do that, I do want to add a bit of padding. So I'm going to go with 6 and 6. And the other thing is we do want that radius. So I am going to go with 12. 12 is too much. Let's go for 6 here as well. 6 is a little, I'm going to go for 8. There we go. I like 8. Now that we've done that, we do want to change the color of the input boxes. One thing I also noticed is that we do want this to be the same font size as this one. So I am going to select it. I'm just going to make it 16. And I think we want semi-bold. I think that is what we selected. Now, one thing I noticed is my icon is kind of a little strange right now. So let's just see if we can change that up. Maybe a glitch or something. I'm not 100% sure. All right. So with that all done, I want to change the input box's colors. So let's change it so that it is about there. So that looks pretty good. Now that we've done that, we're going to see that this right here is kind of popping out. So maybe go for F1. And now that we've done that, we can change this color of these icons. We can change that to white so that we can have a beautiful separation of all of them. So that looks pretty good at this point. That looks like a beautiful looking app, or a start of a good looking app for that matter. One thing I do want to do though is I want to make sure that this thing properly aligns. So we're going to make sure it's like that. And I also want to just double check the spacing as well. So we have 6, which is good because of the padding that we are using. We are using 6. So at this point, this looks pretty darn good. This looks like something. Now, one thing I do want to do is I want to increase the padding of our outer input just because I feel like it's a little narrow. So let's change this. Let's see how 12 looks like. This might be a little too much, but let's see how that looks like. I'm just going to readjust this guy again because it is an absolute. It's not using auto layout. So we just want to make sure that that is looking good. See, in my opinion, 12 is a little too much. So I am, with that all said, decreasing this to about 10. And that's the thing about design. You constantly have to play around with everything until you kind of get the perfect spot. Now with that all done, we will create that beautiful looking search flight button. So what we're gonna do, take the text tool as per usual, drop it in. We're gonna type out search flight. Now at this point, we need to start thinking about a primary color because at this part of the design, that's kind of where we need that now. With that all said, we want to take, I'm just gonna minimize the layers here. We're going to take search flight. I'm going to group that, activate auto layout. And once auto layout is activated, put this on center. And now we're going to start looking for that color. Now I'm going to start with exactly that color right there. I feel like it's a good color. So we're going to set this width to full. And the other thing is we want to add some padding for this button itself. Now, I do want the button to be centered and I want it to be big. So let's see how 15 looks like. Just want to go back to design. I want it even bigger than that. Now I want to select the text itself. Just want to decrease this maybe 1 or 2 pixels. Just want to see how that looks like. I really like that. Now with that done, I just want to increase this padding even more. Maybe go for, let's see how 25 looks like. That might be too much. Actually, that doesn't look bad at all. I'm going to decrease it a little bit though, maybe go to 22. That looks pretty darn good. One thing though is we do want our border radius, which I think is a good middle ground, is about 8. All right, so at this point, we do have our from and to. It still feels a little tight for me. So one thing we can do to kind of just give it a little bit more spacing is kind of change this padding to about 8. And I'm going to do the same for this one. We're going to change that to 8. And let's change this to 8 as well. And again, this is what design is all about. It's constantly playing around with your padding until it matches. So I feel like we're at a good spot right now. The last thing we want to do before we finish up this specific section is we do want to modify the spacing between the date and our search flight, just to kind of give it a separation. So I see that we do still have to add the traveler, economy, and luggage, but I do feel like this is different. And yeah, this one is set to 18. So we do want to do that. So let's first add those other options. So traveler, economy, and luggage. So I'm literally going to take what's on the wireframe. We're going to copy that. We're going to drop in a text tool. So I'm going to take the text tool and we're going to drop that in. We're going to make sure that the color, again, is matched. And we want to go for medium. And so once we're done with that, the next step, I just want to kind of minimize all the layers here because this can get confusing quite quickly. Just going to change this to search BTN. With that done, let's go and add an checkbox. Let's maybe look, let's see if there is a checkbox option in the icons itself. Doesn't really look like it, which is fine. We can just go and quickly create our own one. So I'm going to just take the rectangle tool and we're going to make sure that it is 12 by 12. And I'm going to fix the width and height. And let's give it a radius of maybe 6. Oh, that's way too much. Let's make it 2. And we're going to take traveler and this icon. We're going to group it again and activate auto layout. And we're going to change the layout to horizontal and we're going to center it in the middle. I'm going to decrease this to 6. Let's have a quick peek at how that looks like. That looks good. One thing I do want to double check though is the font size. The font size is 12. And this, you always got to play with caution with font sizes. You don't want it to be too small and you also don't want it to be too big. And that's kind of why a mobile design or any type of design for that matter, you constantly do different type of takes and changes or iterations of it, because maybe this looks good now, but once you start developing it, it might not look good. Okay, so with that, I'm going to change this to travel, and we are going to duplicate it again. And the next one we want is economy. Now that's the one where you're going to select which seat option you want. And 99% of the time, we all kind of select economy. We always want to go for the cheapest option, right? Business class is just way too expensive. The next option is going to be a luggage. This is one that I always misspell for some reason. Now we do have a little effect here. So we have an effect where it cuts off. And the reason it's cutting off is because we want the user to have the ability to scroll to the left or to the right. And we're going to mimic that as well. So to mimic that, we're just literally going to take a luggage. We're going to duplicate it again. I'm going to take all of these. We're going to group it together. We're going to activate auto layout. We're going to change the orientation and we're going to fill it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Now that we've done that, we are physically going to increase this until it starts cutting it off. So I'm going to change it to about this. And then to actually get that effect, we're going to add or activate clip content. So there you can see it's going to start cutting it off. So we're still going to increase this until it starts cutting it off to about there. But one thing though is it's cutting off my G's. So we just want to change the height, probably need to go for fix to be able to fix that. And there we go. That is looking quite sharp. I just want to make sure that's centered align. Just want to increase that height again, just so it doesn't cut off my G's. And let's have a peek. So that looks pretty good. It does look a little small at this stage. While we're here, we can go and just slightly increase this just a tight bit, just so that it looks a little better. So I'm going to go with 18. Let's see how that looks like. We just got to increase our radius now as well. And I want to change this. Let's change this to 6 and see how that looks like. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that it is doing a little bit of a glitch here. It might be a glitch. I've never seen this before. Okay, so I just realized why it's cutting it off. And it is because we activated clip content on the parent itself. Now that we have a bigger box, we can maybe change this to hug and it won't cut off the G at the bottom. So this looks pretty good as it is right now. We have that base, which looks pretty sweet. All right, so with that all done, now we want to give this a bit of spacing and a little bit of padding. So we are going to minimize everything. I just quickly want to do a little bit of housekeeping here. Just want to rename this. Let's change this to options. And with that done, I'm going to take these three and we're going to group this together, activate auto layout. And the reason why we're doing that is because now we can physically change the spacing in between and not affect the ones that's at the top. So let's change this to perhaps 15, maybe 20. Yeah, 20 looks good. Now it is cutting it off. And the reason for that, it sometimes changes to fix, especially when you mess about within. So we're just going to change that to hug, not fill, but hug itself. All right, so now we have our search functionality. When we look at the quick view, it looks pretty good. Now we still need to fine tune a few things. We probably need to go and add a bit of a shadow just so that we can see the difference, because now it's blending into the white, which is not 100% great. Now with that said, in the next chapter, we will be creating this section. We'll finish off the first screen and we'll move into the ticket screen, which is my favorite one, by the way. This is a lot of fun to put together. So make sure to stick around. All right, so this is chapter 3. Chapter 3, we're going to do the last bit of our search artboard or our search frame. And the reason why I'm calling it an artboard, I think, is because of my experience using Adobe products in the past. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I switched to Figma, so I'm still using the word or saying the word artboard instead of frame. Anyway, okay, so next up, we will create the last bit of this frame. What we're going to do is we're going to create a section called upcoming flights. And this is exactly what I want over here. We're also going to create a realistic looking ticket. So this is what this is all about. It needs to look like a actual ticket. So let's start off with it. So going back to our design, we are going to select our search artboard and we're going to scroll down. And as always, we are going to use our text tool. So I'm going to take the text tool, we're going to drop it in and I'm going to type out upcoming flights. Perfect. So now that that's done, I'm going to change this to perhaps 16. And of course, we want to change our colors. Now with that, I do want to increase the font size because I feel like 16 might be a little too small because it is technically a heading. So let's just see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to set it to medium as well. Oh, it's already medium. Okay, well, we're going to change that to semi-bold. That looks good. Now that with that done, we might increase it later on a little bit. But I do want to create a right-hand side, and we are essentially going to create a transparent button. So again, taking the text tool, we're going to drop that in, and we're going to say view all. All right, so now that we've done that, change this to perhaps 12, and I don't want it that thick. Maybe medium would look good. And of course, we got to change that color. Color is important, so just quickly change it. And then with that all said, we want to select both of them, group it together, and I'm going to rename this one to heading. We do want to activate auto layout, change the layout to horizontal, center it, and change it to fill content. We're not done yet. We want to change this to auto, but it is switched around now. So let's quickly minimize this stuff. I just want to swap these guys around so that we do have it looking a little better. All right, so with that, next I want to add an icon just so that it looks a little bit more polished. So the icon I want to go for perhaps is, let's start with right, and let's see what we have here. So I do like this one right here. It's kind of a carrot. I'm actually going to undo that, and let's see if we can get one that's rounded. So let's see if we do have that option. So I don't think we do have outlined around it. There we go. We do have that option. I'm going to select it right there. And now we can fine tune this. So of course it's way too big. It's set at 24. So let's change this to 14. That looks good. And again, it's not going to drop it in the artboard or in the frame exactly where we want it. So we do need to change that up. So I'm just going to move it to exactly there. But then we do want to see, this is what I don't like about Figma, is it kind of moves and opens up different things that I'm not really using. So why are we doing that? Okay, so with that said, we are going to group those two together and activate auto layout. And again, we do want to change the auto. I do want to set a specific distance or a gap. So let's start with 6. And we do want to change this color. So I'm just quickly going to change this color. Once that's done, one thing I do want to do is just change the wording. Just going to say button view all. Now, quick thing, you are going to see that the width is set to fixed. We want to change that to hug. And let's have a look quick view and see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. One thing though is I do want to add some spacing here. So we do want to increase the spacing between these. And the only way to do this, and the only way to make sure that you can basically control the spacing between those items and those items alone, is we need to group it again. And I'm going to call this bottom half, activate auto layout. And now we can change the spacing. I'm going to change it to 35. Have a quick view. That looks pretty good. Now that we've done that, we want to work within bottom half, and we want to work in this section. Now, with that all said, we created the upcoming flights. And do I have any spelling issues? No, I don't. I always check the spelling and grammar as I design. But now we want to create this ticket effect. And essentially what I have here is I have a date of departure and a date of arrival. So date and time departure, date and time arrival. So let's quickly do that. One thing I want to do, take the text tool, and we are going to use APR. We're going to say 6. Physically going to duplicate that, and let's make it 12.00, and let's say AM. Perfect. So now with that done, I want to add a few icons just to kind of make it a little bit more dynamic. So we're going to say calendar. Again, we want to activate fill, import that. And we want to say time because I want the actual time icon as well. So I don't really see something that I really like. This one, let's go for that one. That one is pretty good, but it overrode our other one. So we just want to undo that. And just click anywhere on the artboard. We're going to click on the icon again, and you're going to see that it creates the two that we want. So we're going to select those two. We're going to drag it in to our section or to the auto layout component that we're working with. All right, so now that we have this, one thing I do want to do is we want to change the font size, or the actual width and height, not font size, the width and height of this. Let's change it to 14. There we go. And change this one to 14 as well. Select both of them And again, as always, we got to go and change the color. Got to stay on top of the color. If you don't stay on top of the color, it's going to get cumbersome later on. So I'm going to do the same with the text tools. We're going to select it and we are going to change the color of those as well. All right, so now that we have the base here, now we can start adding our grouping and our auto layout. So grouping it again, we're going to call this one date. We are going to activate auto layout, change the layout, and make sure that it's centered. And within date, I'm just going to swap this guy around. We're going to do exactly the same for this one as well. So we're going to take that icon and that text, group it together, and we're just going to say time, activate auto layout, change the orientation and make sure it's centered. There we go. Now we have date, now we have time. Again, we're going to take both of them and we are going to group it, and we're just going to say stats. You can change it to whatever you want. Now that we have that, activate auto layout, change the orientation, and now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so with that, I want to go and just add a little bit of a fill. So I'm just going to change it to white for now. You're going to see why I'm doing this specifically. Next up, we want to create the outer frame or the outer group that is going to act as the ticket itself. So with that said, we're going to take stats. Stats we can use because it's already grouped and it's already set to go. So we're going to take stats and we're going to activate fill. I'm going to create an F1 fill for now and see how that goes. And also add a bit of padding on all sides, just like that. And we will add a radius, perhaps 8, or let's start with 6. Now that we've done that, we can do the same for these guys. So highlight both of them so that we can change them at the same time. We're going to add about a padding of 6 and add a radius of about 6 as well. For now, we might change it later on. Let's see. Now that we've done that, we can go and take this whole thing, and there's two options here. We can either duplicate it and we can put it in a group and we can activate auto layout, or for now we can set it to fixed just so that we can see how we want it to look like. So I'm just going to go with this route for now, but later on we're going to swap it so that the height is going to be full. And again, the reason for that is because we want to have that scrolling effect, very similar to what we did over here. Okay, so with that done, the next step here is that we want to make sure that we regroup this again. So I'm going to take date and time, I'm going to group it again, activate auto layout. I'm going to rename that to date time, and we're going to say full content and set this to auto. Perfect. A little small change that I want to do. I just want to increase the padding here just a slight bit, maybe to 8. The same with this one. Just want to change the padding left and right to 8. We do have our date. So one thing I do want to add here is the year. So let's change to 2024. Let's see what I did over here. I didn't add a year, which is fine. So we have 2024. We have April 6th. And I just want to add a comma here, just so we kind of, you just wrap everything and that everything kind of looks good. When I say wrap, I mean, it's kind of a slang I use to basically express that we want to fine tune it just so that it looks good overall. Okay, so we do have our date, we do have our time. Next up, we want to create a ticket effect. So this is where stuff kind of gets cool. So before I do that, I just want to see what kind of spacing I use. So I used 16, it looks like, for everything. Let's see what I used over here is 12. So let's change all this to 16 so that we can have a little bit more spacing. Okay, so next up, we are going to be a little bit creative, and you most likely have seen this in the past, is we're going to go YYC to CPT. And at the top, I'm thinking we should probably go for date. And at the bottom, we probably go for time. Let's play around, because then if we do it that way, we are going to have some duplication. So let's play around. Let's see what happens here. All right, so with that all said, we're going to make sure we in with our stat container, take the text tool, and I'm going to drop it in there. I'm going to say YYC. I'm going to take this because I don't want it to be there. So we're going to select stat and we're going to change the orientation. And I'm just going to move this guy to the bottom. And now I'm going to increase the font size. Let's change it to 18. And actually, I'm going to change it to 20. Change the font color. Font color has got to be the color that we use for everything. And we want to go for perhaps bold. I'm going to be going for bold. Let's see how that looks like. That looks Good. That looks good. Might even go increase the font size to even a little bit more, maybe 24. Let's see how that goes. All right. So with that, we're going to take that text tool, duplicate it, and let's go for the time here. So I'm going to go 12:00. Now stick with me here because I'm probably going to change this up to something else. So we're going to have 12 there. Obviously change this to 12px. So 12 change to 12 and have that set to normal. And we're going to duplicate this again, move this guy up, and we are going to set this to APR 6. There we go. So now the issue we're running into here, which is a big issue, is that we have duplication. So we have the date and the time at the top, and then we have the date and the time again. So it kind of doesn't make any sense. So let's change this up. Let's change it to gate. We're just literally going to change it to, I think in the wireframe I used D36. So let's literally just change this to D36. And the bottom one, let's go for business. That might be good. So let's change this to business. All right, so now we have the gate and we have YYC and we have business. So it kind of gives the user the date and time at the top, which is good. But now it also gives us the gate and it also gives us the class of the actual ticket. So no duplication. One little tip I can give you: never have duplicated items in your design. It just doesn't make any sense. Don't do it. Just stay away from it at all costs. Okay, with that, select all those. We're going to group it. We're going to activate auto layout, and we're going to decrease our gap just a tiny bit, just so that it is kind of tucked in. Just going to see how that looks like. It is starting to look good. I'm just going to increase it maybe just a slight bit. And that is looking okay. We're still going to fine tune it a little bit as we go, as always. Now that we've done that, I want to create a little airplane with a few dots. So let's go ahead and do that. Going to take this frame 36. Let's just add or rename it to airport and duplicate it again. And we're going to say from airport. Perfect. And we will change this to CPT. And let's change this to A10. Now that we've done that, we're going to group this again. We're activating auto layout. We're going to change the orientation as per always, change the full and change this to auto. Now that we have basically a to and a from, just going to change this frame. I'm going to change that to container. We're going to open this guy up. We have the to, we have the from. Now, quick thing in the from, I do want everything to be on the right-hand side. And we just want to make sure that this is also aligning on the center. Now, the last step before we finish this little part up is we're going to take our line tool. I'm just going to drag it here. And I think when we drag it by default, it's not going to add it into the space that we wanted. So I'm going to take this. We're just going to drop it in here. But you're going to notice, again, it's not going to drop it where we want it. So we do want to select container and we want to center it. Now that we've centered it, it looks pretty good. Now we just got to fine tune this line that we just added. Again, I'm going to change the color. I'm going to match it with all the colors that we've been using. And now we're going to change the settings on it a slight bit. I do want to go for dash, but I want to increase that dash just a tiny bit. And let's see how that looks like. That looks okay. I'm just going to decrease it maybe just again. Just want to see how that looks like. Maybe in between. Let's meet in the middle. Let's go for 4. All right, let's see how 4 looks like. That looks good. I like that. Okay, so now that we've done that, now we are going to add our icon, our little plane icon. So let's just reuse what we already have. So I'm going to take this right here. I'm going to copy this whole thing. And when you can copy stuff, always go for copying stuff. It just saves a lot of time. We're going to drop it in here. Now, a couple of things though, we do want to make sure this guy is set to perhaps 90 degrees, minus 90, because we're not going backwards, we're going forwards. And I'm going to change the font size of it. We're going to change it to perhaps 14. I just want to see how that looks like. That looks good. Now I want to change this to hug. We are going to do a little trick here, and I'm going to show you why I'm doing this. I'm going to change the background to that. With that said, I want absolute positioning, and we're going to put it about here, right in the middle. The reason why I have the background is because I don't want the dots to be in the actual background of the icon itself. So let's go and add a bit of padding here. And you're going to see that it does take away some of the icons. Now we just got to move it about, make sure it's nicely centered. And let's make sure 43 on this side. So we do want to move it a little bit to the right. 43, 45, 46. There we go. That's pretty much right in the middle. I'm just going to decrease it just a slight bit and move it up. Move it, let's see, let's make this 15.5. And right here, we have it in the middle. Now, I do feel like the icon is a little too small now. So let's go and increase this icon just a tiny bit. And let's just move it so that it's centered again. And let's see, that looks pretty good. I mean, we can fine tune it a little bit. And I think the only way we are going to be able to fine tune it is if we make the actual spacing of the entire box a little bigger. And when I say spacing, I'm referring to the width. So we got to extend the width of this box. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select the entire box and we're going to increase this to about there. So let's go for 300. Maybe 300 is going to look good. And then now that we've done that, we are going to go back to our line. I'm just going to scroll to the line itself. And let's see, the line is set to fix, so we want to set that to fill. And the other thing in the container, I do want to see if there's an option. Okay, so there isn't an option. And of course, when you set it to auto, you can't really set the gap in between the items. So to get around that, we're going to take our line and we are going to set it to fixed. And we will decrease this to about there. So let's see how that looks like. That's already looking much, much better. Now, the last thing I do want to do is just move this guy so that's right in the center. So we just got to do a little bit of measurements because we are using absolute to move this around. We do want to make sure that it is kind of close, which there it is pretty close. I think at this point, I do feel like that line is a little too small. So we do want to increase that line, maybe increase the width of it. So let's change this to 2. And the other thing is I want to make this round on the one side and round on the other side. And let's see what happens if we make the whole thing round. See how that looks like. I am going to increase the spacing on this a little bit. Just kind of play around. I do feel like we are getting closer, but I do want to change the color a little bit. See how that would look like. Maybe not the color, but the opacity. See if that would definitely help. And again, design is all about fine tuning. You constantly need to go back, change a few things here, change a few things there until you can get to a point where you really, really like it. So I'm getting to a point where I'm starting to like it. I do feel like we are getting closer, but have not really hit the nail on the head with perfection here. So I have 70 here, 64 on that side. So we do want to move it slightly to the left, 68, 60, there we go, 67 and 67. So it's right in the middle. So let's have a look at how that looks like. Now, the last thing, just want to move our plane a little up. So maybe go for 11.5 again. Now we are going to need to fine tune this again, just because I just realized we didn't do the spacing here. I do want the spacings to be consistent. And going back to our wireframe, we can see that we do have a line there. And the reason we have the line there is because I want to replicate a ticket. So with that all said, let's go and add that. So I just want to check out the spacing that I did prior. So it's 16 or 15, give or take, and 20. So let's go ahead and add a line into our box here in our stat box. So I'm just going to drag a line there. Obviously, it's going to move it right to the top. So we just want to minimize some of these folders just so that we can get to drag this thing into the container. I'm just going to drop it right here. And that is definitely not what we want. So I'm going to undo that. And we're going to drop it. Let's just drop it right at the top. Once it's dropped to the top, we can now move it to exactly where we want it. So I want this to be right there. Next up, I want to make sure I hit full, but now you're going to notice that this line is stopping right there. And the reason for that is because of the padding. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So the way that we can fix this is that we would need to take this padding, move it to 0, but then add it over here so that we can have that effect again. So changing this to 16 again. Now we have our line there, which looks pretty good. Now I want to change it all white. Let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. We're getting closer. We're getting super close. I like it. Okay, so the stats, I do want to change our gap so that it matches. So I am going to change this to 16 and let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. One thing I do want to do though is I do want to increase the border radius of this guy. See how that looks like. So I think like we're at a good spot here. One thing I do want to do though is increase the padding over here and see how that looks like. So to do that, we're just going to increase the padding like so, and maybe 10 should be good. 10 looks, that looks really, really good. I'm really glad that I did that off the bat because normally this takes forever. Now, again, we do want to change this or move it about. Again, I just want to make sure that our spacing is good. 74, that's not good at all. So 65, 69, so it should be about here 67, 67. There we go. I'm just going to move it up a slight bit, so we want to go for that 0.5 again. Let's see how that looks like. So off the bat here, we do have a ticket effect and we do have our line. All right, so let's see how orange would look. Actually, orange might actually work. Yeah, it kind of does. It kind of does work for us. So I'm going to go with orange. I'm going to stick with orange for this one. The next step is I just want to finish off the ticket effect. And what I want to do is we are going to swap out a couple of colors here. I do want to check something though. If I take this search and change this to F1 like so, now we have a little bit of a popping effect, and we change this to white. That looks much better already. Just want to see how that looks like. Yeah, that already looks, even our little dots is looking better doing it this way. All right, one thing I just want to do is change this color to white as well. And now that line that we have, which is this one right here, the separator, we do want to make sure that it matches just so that we have that little cut. And with that said, I'm actually going to change it to 2. Let's see how it looks like. And here we come with the dots again. We're going to change it to dashes. And we want to make sure that we are going for round. Looks good. That looks like it should fit. All right. So the idea that I have behind this is that it needs to look like a realistic ticket. That is essentially what I'm going for here. The last thing we do want to do is just change these backgrounds to F1 just so that we can see it again. Actually, let's have a look at how it would look like with no color. So I'm just going to undo this and we are going to change this to 0 and change this to 0. And let's see. Simplicity sometimes just looks really good. And hey, that does look really good. I really like that. So that looks like a realistic ticket to me. We do want to duplicate this and we want to create that cutoff effect. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's take this ticket, this entire ticket, which is stats right here, and we're going to duplicate it. And once we've duplicated this, we're going to group it again, auto layout, we're going to clip the content, and there we go. We have our look and feel that we want to go for. So there we go. We created that effect. We do have that kind of sliding effect that I wanted. I do want to add a little bit of gap here. So maybe change that to 15. And now, last but not least, we do want to change one thing here. And the thing that I do want to change is the gap in between. Now I want to take this ticket that I have here. I'm going to rename it to ticket. And one thing though, is I do probably want to add it to the bottom half. So I'm going to drag it into the bottom half. And the reason for that is because I want the heading and the ticket to be grouped together so that I can change this spacing. And I do want to change this to 25. The next step here that we need to do is create the menu. So in the next chapter, we are going to create the menu. And we're going to start creating the frame for the ticket. All right, so in this chapter, we are going to create that navigation at the bottom. So looking or going back to our wireframes, we do see we do have a space at the bottom that's going to act as the navigation. So let's go ahead and put that together. Now, first things first, I am going to reuse these icons to save time and make sure the video doesn't end up being 10 hours, but only 2 hours. So to do that, we're going to start by selecting this search frame. I'm going to minimize everything here. We're going to start adding that beautiful navigation at the bottom. So first off, we're going to take our icon and we're literally just going to copy it, and we're going to minimize the folders on the left-hand side, click on the frame itself and just hit paste so that's right at the bottom. But now we got to navigate or manage this a little bit. So first off, I do want to start off by creating a home. So changing or selecting flights and changing that to home is the first step here. We are going to make this a tiny bit smaller because we are going to stick a lot of stuff into the navigation. We do want to make sure that it's a tiny bit smaller. Now in the actual design showcase itself, it is going to look a little bit small, but that's fine for now. We can always modify it later on. Okay, we're going to take this icon. We're going to make sure we select that auto layout frame, and we are going to remove every padding that is added to it. So all of the padding, and we are going to change this width and height. We are going to change that to hug for now. And we will be removing this beautiful background fill that is white. Okay, so now with that done, we want to change our icons. We're going to select the icon, go back to material symbols, and we are going to search for home. Now that I have home, I'm just going to search and see if we can find something that we are going to like. Maybe turn this on, so turn the fill on, and let's just scroll through this and see if there's something that we do like. I'm actually going to go a little bit creative and go for that one. Why not? Let's go for that one and see how that looks like. Actually, I thought it was a little leaf and not a chimney smoke, so that might not be a good option. So let's continue scrolling and see if we can find an icon that we really like. Maybe this one. I like that one. Let's go for that one. Okay, so with that icon selected, we do want to change the color to match that of the rest of it. So we're going to select that. And now with that done, I just want to have a quick view at it. It looks pretty good. I like the size of it as well. I wanted to change the size of the icon, but actually that looks really decent. Just want to double check that again. Now that we have the icon, we definitely take this and duplicate it. We want to do the next one. So the next one is going to be search. So I'm going to change this to search. We do want to change the icon. So opening up material symbols again, and we are going to search for search and see if we can get a good looking search icon. Okay, so I'm gonna go for this one right here. I do wanna go for a kind of rounded approach for this one. So wanna make sure that I click the rounded option, go ahead and change that color again. And now before I continue, because I don't want any of this items, if we're gonna duplicate it again, I don't want that to stretch the actual height of our entire frame. So I am going to take both of the icons that we already have. I'm going to select that and I'm going to group it again, put on auto layout, and we're going to change it so that it goes to the horizontal. So going to the right. Okay, so have a quick look. We do have the search in there. Perfect. Now we're going to duplicate it again. And the next one I do want is going to be trips. And now we got to find an icon that's going to work for trips. This might be a tricky one. So let's see. I'm going to try trips, but I doubt that I'm going to find something. Yeah, that does not look good. So maybe do a luggage might be a good approach here. Let's see how that looks like. I don't like it because I always, when I go for an icon, especially in this kind of scenario, I do want the width to kind of match. Okay, so maybe let's go for a map pin. Maybe that would look good for us to use. So I'm going to drop that icon in right there. And again, I do want to change the color. So let's go and change that color. With that done, we're going to duplicate it again. And we will be changing trips to notifications. So notifications. And one thing I do want to make sure is that we do have that capital. Let's go for a bell, which is pretty straightforward. Let's just see if we can get a basic bell. And I do like this one, so we're going to go for that one. Change the color again. So we're going to change the color. Then we have one more. So we're going to duplicate this. And this one is going to be account. So we're going to select that icon, open up material symbols, and we're going to search for account, see if we can find something, which I think this one is going to work just great. All right. Change the color here real quick. And once that's done, let's have a quick peek and see. I do like that. That looks pretty good at this point. We do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a specific reason why I'm going for 5. And the reason for that is because trips is going to be the center point of everything. All right, with that done, I'm just going to close this color and we're going to select this frame and I'm going to rename it to menu. Once that's renamed, we are going to change this to auto and change this to fill. But now here's a couple of things though. I do want the navigation to go right to the end of the frame itself. So to do that, we are going to select all of our items prior and we're going to group that, probably going to activate auto layout. The next step now is that we do want to replicate the frames padding, which is 25 left and 25 right. And we will be changing this to 0, but we will be adding it to this frame again. Therefore, our navigation, everything is going to be kind of moved back again, but our navigation is going to be right to the edge. That's exactly what I want. All right, so with that done, I'm just going to rename this frame. I'm just going to say inner content and go back to the menu and we are going to activate fill. And once fill is activated, we will go ahead and add a bit of padding. So I do want to make sure everything is centered. Let's start with 25. Let's see how 25 might look like. It might be too much. So let's try 16. And I'm just going to go back to the view again, because here's a trick with doing this for an iPhone is because we have this rounded edges at the bottom, we want to make sure that we accommodate for that with our design itself. So going back to it, we do want to make sure that we do accommodate for that. So let's increase the padding at the bottom until we have it about there. And now that we have that, let's have a quick look. So we can bring everything down just a slight bit, but it is super close. So I'm going to bring this back to 35 and maybe increase this to 25 and see how that looks like. Maybe just slightly decrease this to 22 and increase this to about 37. Let's see how that looks like. I do like that. I feel like we are getting very close. We're not 100% there yet. So I'm going to change this to about 18 and let's increase this again and see how that looks like. Actually, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change this to a fixed height. And with that fixed height, we can basically change this to 0 and this to 0. And let's decrease this for now to about there. And now with that done, we will increase the spacing just so that we can get it right to the bottom. Now let's have a look. See, now it's basically getting cut off by the radius of the phone itself. So I'm actually going to change the fixed of this back to hug and we will change this to 35 and now we can increase it until we can get to a point that we really like. So let's see how that looks like. One thing I do want to do is just decrease this to 35. So I'm decreasing the actual frame to 35. I'm actually going to decrease it even more, maybe to 30. And let's see how that looks like. That looks good. The last step I want to do is just increase this a tiny bit, maybe to 15 and see how that looks like. I think we're there. I think we are pretty much there. There's one thing I do want to do, that is slightly decrease the icon sizes of all of these. So we're just going to select all of them and we're going to slightly decrease them. So I do want to be very careful when I do this. I don't want to go too small. And that right there looks, to me, looks pretty good. Drop in the comments below what you think. I mean, do you think it looks good or do you think it needs some improvement? Now, with that said, I am going to decrease the opacity of 4 out of 5 of them. So all of them, selecting all of them, but deselecting the middle one. And we are going to change the opacity to maybe 80 or maybe even 50. Let's see how 50 looks like. I feel like 50 is too much. So let's go for 60 and see how that looks like. So there we go. We do have the trip right in the middle. And I feel like it is in the middle. We can double check it. We can double check by literally clicking on it. So it's 222 and 183. So it's not 100% in the middle. Now there's a couple of things we can do to make sure that it's in the middle. And the way to do that is that we have a consistent width on all of them. So we do have a mixed width. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to fixed. We do want probably notifications is the one that's got the most width to it, which would be 60. So we do want to make sure that all of them are 60. So why am I doing this? This is going to make sure that everything is always going to be aligned properly. So let's have a look and see how that looks like. So that looks pretty good. I have my trips right in the middle, and I do have my icons on this side as well. Now we did gain a little bit more padding on the left and right, but that's fine because that still looks pretty good. That still looks like it's right in the middle of the fonts. But in the next chapter, we are going to do the second screen. So we're going to do the ticket itself. And I'm super excited about this one because this one is definitely going to be a lot of fun. And a lot of the stuff that's in here, we've already done. So we can copy and paste to get this whole thing done. All right, so in this chapter, we are going to create the entire ticket frame. So what you're seeing right now is the wireframe that I've created prior to this video. And in the previous chapters, we created this beautiful search. So when we have a look at the quick view here, we can see that we have our beautiful search frame. Now, a quick side note, we still do need to add a few things here and there. So for example, later on in this video, we are going to add a couple of shadows just to kind of finish it off and round it off, just so it looks like a beautiful looking mobile app. Okay, with that, let's go and create the ticket frame. So first things first, I am going to take this search and we're literally just going to duplicate it as is. We're not going to go and create a new frame just because that can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So with that said, one thing I do want to do is go back to the wireframe and just have a quick look so I can see that we do have a circle, some text, and a circle again, which I know because I created the wireframe. I do want a back button. I also still want the settings or the options or the menu, and I want to maybe add some text in the middle. So let's go and do that. So first things first, let's get rid of this right here. And the other thing, let's go and get rid of the subtext. So I just want welcome back, and I'm going to change the text. I'm just going to say back to trips. Perfect. Now with that done, we want to take this icon. Now it is nested in its own frame. So I'm just going to go and ungroup it. And I am going to duplicate this. I'm going to take this one and move it to there. So we have that kind of look and feel. The other thing is I want to rename it. I'm just going to say back. We are going to click on it and open up material symbols. And we want arrow left. This is the one I want, but before I do that, I do want to change this to rounded. I do like the rounded a little bit more than the other one. And again, as always, and as throughout this whole video, we do want to change the color of it as well. Let's have a quick look and see how this looks like. I do feel like the text is way too big. So we do want to take this text, make sure I select the text for that matter. We're going to change that to medium and let's change it to 18. And let's see how that looks like. So back to trips, it looks much better, but you know what? I think now that I look at it, I think I'm actually going to move it to the left. So to do that, we are going to take this font and back, we're going to group it together. We're going to auto layout it, change the auto, and we're going to change it to perhaps 25. Let's see how that looks like. So that looks way better already. I am actually going to go a step further and I'm going to get rid of the circle as well. I don't like the circle anymore, so I'm just going to minimize the circle. We are going to click on the icon itself, change it to perhaps 30. We are going to change the color to white as well. Let's go back, have a look at that. That looks already much better. But one thing I do want to do is I want to change the gap spacing, maybe change that to 12. And the other thing I want to do is just decrease the width on this, just so that it kind of snugs in there. So that looks already much better. I do feel like the spacing is a little bit too much. So going back to that frame again, let's change this to 6 and just see how 6 looks like. Yeah, that looks good. I like where we're going with this. So last thing I do want to do is I just want to decrease the width on this one as well, just because I want it to be right on the edge. So we're just going to decrease it until we can get to that point. And once we've done that, go back to that frame and just increase this to 12. Let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. So that gives the user the ability to go back to the trip. So go back to the main section, which is going to be this one. All right, we still have the settings or the menu or the ellipse on the right-hand side, which is good. That's exactly what I want. One thing I do want to make sure everything is centered, so it looks like it is. I just want to rename this back container. I'm a big advocate for renaming frames or groups or anything like that, just because it makes it much easier once you start developing this thing. All right, so going back to our wireframe, we do want this feature right here. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this, we're going to get rid of it. Same with this, we're going to get rid of it. We don't need it. And at the bottom here, also get rid of all of that. The menu as well. We want to get rid of everything, have a nice, clean, fresh look. And with that, I just want to see our wireframe. We don't have a navigation at the bottom. That's just because we are going physically into a ticket. I don't want the user to have the ability to navigate at the bottom. I literally just want them to be able to go back. Okay, with that all said, what we're going to do next is build out the actual ticket. So going to the wireframe, we do want to start with the basics here. So we do have a gate here, which is kind of matching with the gate over here. So with that, one thing I've also noticed is the border radius. We want to make sure that we match the border radius. It's a little more than this current one. So I'm going to increase the radius to about 10 or maybe even 12. 12 looks good. I am going to go ahead and clean everything out within. We're going to start fresh on this one. All right. Now with that said, the first thing we want to do is add this section right here. So I'm going to start with the gate. And one thing I'm going to do to speed up some time here is I'm going to reuse some of my elements that I already have. So I'm going to take that one. We're going to drop that in. And now because we have auto layout and because it's set to hug, that is the reason why everything or the height kind of moved way up close again, which is fine. We can leave that as is. I do want this one to be a tiny bit bigger. And now that it's a little bigger, we're going to duplicate it and we are going to say gate. And this one, I want a tiny bit smaller. And with that said, let's even increase this one a tiny bit. And now with that done, we are going to group them together, activate auto layout. Once we've activated auto layout, I am going to decrease the gap just so it's about there. We are going to change this D60. I'm going to change the medium to about semi-bold. So looking at our preview, that looks pretty good. Now, with that said, I want this to be renamed. So I'm just going to say gate, and we are going to group it again, activate auto layout. And this time I'm going to set auto, also change the orientation to horizontal. Now, this is going to be important because the next step of this is we're actually going to add the airline details. So let's think about an airline that would work for this. Now I'm going to choose Iconify. Maybe we can get something here. Let's try Air Canada just because we are, there we go. We have that. I'm choosing Air Canada just because it's Calgary. So I'm going to select this and let's change the color to match more of their color, which is red. I don't want to import 140. And by the way, I'm using Iconify, which is another plugin. If I'm going too quick, just drop in the comments and I can explain a little more. I'm going to change the height to 50, or actually I'm going to even change it to 25 because I don't want it to be too big. And we are going to import it. And I'm going to close this guy and we can see we have that beautiful icon there. Hey, that looks really good. I really like that. Okay, next up, we are going to change one thing. So when you use Iconify, this is one thing I don't like about them, is it comes in as a frame. So the group comes in as a frame. So I normally go and change the frame to a group just so it's easier and we have that consistency. All right, now we are going to add the wording Air Canada. So I'm just going to say Air Canada. Okay, and for some reason our color is white. So again, I want to change that to our actual colors, and that looks pretty good there. One thing I do want to add, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this Air Canada. Once I've duplicated it, all right, so I just noticed that our text has dropped into our icon area, which I don't want. So we do want to move this out. So I'm going to move it out. And once I've done that, I am going to group these two together again. I'm just going to open this up a little bit more so we can see the layers a little better. Activate auto layout, and we're going to change the orientation to that of vertical. Once I've done that, we are going to move this below just so it's next to the logo. One thing I do want to do is I want to change the second one, and let's say Star Alliance. Now I got to make sure that I spell this correctly. And let's say member, Star Alliance member. Hopefully I spelled it correctly. I'm not great with spelling. That's one thing I've never been great with. All right, we're going to change that to 12 and change that to perhaps light even. So let's see how light looks like. That might be a little too much. Oh, wow. We do have a lot going on here. So we got to go back and double check why we are seeing double icons. Now, sometimes I have found that it can be a glitch and sometimes it isn't. So for some reason, we are seeing an extra icon there, but we're not seeing it in the design or in the frame itself. So I am going to scroll out and just move a few things about, just going to check if there isn't an icon hidden somewhere. Okay, so I just closed down the play and I'm just going to try once more. Sometimes this works, sometimes that fixes the issue. And hey, it worked. It fixed the issue. That's perfect. Okay, now quick thing before we move on, I do want to rename my frame. I'm just going to say ticket. And with that done now, I do want to take this Air Canada Star Alliance member. I do want to decrease the gap here just a little bit so that it kind of matches about there. And let's see how that looks like. That looks good. With that done, now we can go and select our outer input layer or our frame for that matter. And we do want to make sure that we go fill content, and we do want to make sure that we set auto. Now, last thing, we do want to make sure that these two are in its own group, that we can set the auto layout, which is exactly what I want. So I'm just going to change this to 12 and make sure that it's centered. Let's have a quick look and see how that looks like. I'm going to decrease this to maybe 10. Just want to see. And that looks good. One small thing I do want to change is just the font size on these. Just want to make it a tiny bit smaller. There we go. That looks pretty good. One thing I do want to do though is increase the font size or the width and height for that matter of this icon, not the font size. And now with that, just increase the gap here a little bit, just so it kind of rounds off nicely. There we go. We do have our beautiful looking Air Canada. We have our gate there. So now we have the top part is done. This I want to make sure is right aligned. The next step now of going back to our wireframe, just want to add a line. So I'm going to reuse the line that we already created because we did spend a lot of time kind of fine tuning these lines. So I'm just going to reuse them and we're going to drop that in here. So I'm going to make sure that it is right here. Drop that in. We do want to just do a little bit of housekeeping here. So I'm going to rename this to Air Canada. And the same thing for this, I'm just going to say inner content. Now with that done, because we do have those dots, we want to replicate what we did in the previous design as well. So do want to take this padding and make it 0, but we do want to add that in here to make it a little bit more realistic. Now going back to outer input, I do want to change this to 12 as well, just so that we can get that spacing that we are looking for. So let's see what kind of spacing I used. And I think I used 25, which is fine. We can use that as well. So going back to this, we're going to change this to 25, go to outer input. We're going to change that to 25 as well. There we go. Now we're starting to get somewhere. It's starting to look like something. All right. Quick thing though, I do want to change the background. Want to click on background and we want to click on unsplash. We want to change this background. Now it might reset some of our settings that we already set, which is fine, but we are going to search for the destination, which in this case is going to be Cape Town. And let's probably go for this image. I do like that image. And hey, it did keep our settings that we already set prior. So that is pretty good. Just want to see how that looks like. Okay, so with that, we want to take these dots. I'm going to decrease it and we're just going to keep it there for now. We will fine tune this as we kind of progress through this, but I'm just going to change that so that it has a square instead of a round, just so it kind of finishes off a little better there. Next up, I do want to change the gap so that the gap of the actual item is a little better, because at the top we have 25, at the bottom we don't really have anything. So let's see if we can change this to 25 as well. Now we're starting to see that it's looking like a ticket, which is really nice. All right, with that, the next step is we do want to add this feature right here. And to add that feature, we will reuse what we already created over here. Just it's going to save us a lot of time. Now let's go and recreate this. Now I'm not going to spend tons of hours again on this. We're literally just going to copy what we already created. And that's the beauty of this. And that's the beauty of using Figma, is you can reuse elements that you already have. Okay, we're going to take this and we're going to drop it in right there. And one thing I do want to have a look at is our actual padding and spacing. So down there, we had to add a bit of padding at the top and bottom. So here we don't need that. So I'm going to get rid of it. But one thing I do want to change up though is in our actual mockup, we have YYC and it says Calgary. So we're going to take this business one and we're going to rename that to Calgary. The top one we're going to get rid of. We're going to select this though, and we are going to center them. I'm going to do the same for this one as well. The other one is CPT. And of course, we are going to say Cape Town. So we're going to change this business and we're going to change that to Cape Town. Perfect. Now we are getting closer, but one thing I do want to do though is I want to increase the font size on this because this is the actual ticket and I want to make sure that this is very visible. So we're going to make it nice and big like that. And having a quick look, that looks pretty good. I do want to increase the gap though between the items. So let's select to and from airport frames here. And let's just increase the gap just a slight bit. And with that said, I want to take Calgary and Cape Town and just literally make it one smaller. And I want to change the color just a slight bit, just so it's a little lighter on the eyes, maybe about there. And Cape Town and CPT, I do want to make sure that that frame, that auto layout frame, it is centered. And now with that said, let's have a quick peek. That looks pretty good. Let's just go back to our design. Let's see how this looks like. We do have a spacing of 25, which we are doing. Now I've noticed that on the padding left and right in the mockup, I had 20 instead of 25. So that's probably what bugged me. So let's change that to 20 as well. We are going to take our little plane here. We're going to move it to our center here. But one thing I noticed though, is I feel like we would need to manipulate this just a tiny bit. Let's just see how it looks like. And that's already looking much better than obviously what it was, but I still have issues with that line. So we do want to just take this line here real quick, and I am going to just decrease the dash just a tiny bit so we can get more lines out of it. And we will move our plane just so it looks a little better. So we have 84 and 81. So we want to move it to there, 82 and 83. So that's about center right there. That already looks better, but I'm going to increase the icon size just a tiny bit. Let's just see if that looks better if I increase the icon size. So we're going to make it 35. Going back to our icon here, I'm just going to move it to about there. And let's just see how that looks like. That already looks much better, but I'm going to bring back the white color just because I like that. Obviously, you can do whatever you want. That's why I've put this entire design on the Figma community, is you can play around with it. All right, last but not least, I do want to increase this just a bit. Then once that's increased, we can just move it to about there. Double check our alignment here real quick. So we have 78, 66. So we do want to move it a bit to the right. 72, 72. So that should be right in the center. So let's have a quick look. All right. So with that, we do have our to and from, and that is nicely added to it now. The next step is we want to add the seat and the class. So this is pretty fun. This is going to be something that we've already done. So we can reuse this that we have right here. So I'm going to take this, we're going to copy it, and we are going to add it as well into the outer input. So I'm going to paste it right here. One thing I do want to do once we've done this is we want to group it again because I want it to have its own row. So I'm going to rename this and we're just going to say row, and I'm going to activate auto layout as I always do. And then we are going to add a bit of a fill. So I'm going to add an F1, F1, F1. There we go. So now that we have that in there, we want to change it to the seat at the top. So we want to take gate and we want to change that to seat. And this one, what seat did we go for? Okay, 15B. So we're going to go for 15 and we're going to go for B. Now that we've done that, just want to have a quick view. Obviously, it's not going to look great, but we can now take this and play around with it. So first things first, I'm going to take this gate and we're just going to change it to seat, and we can now play around with the padding. So I'm going to take or add some padding to it. So let's start with 12 and see how 12 looks like. 12 looks okay. Let's have a quick look. Yeah, that looks good. And now we can add some radius to it. All right, so I just realized that I added the background color to the wrong one. So I'm just gonna remove that fill and I'm gonna add it to the seat. So same thing, we're just gonna add a fill and we're gonna add F1. And same with this, I'm just gonna add 15 and we're gonna add that border radius as well. Go back to the row though, and remove the padding because the row I want to use for something else. Okay, so with that done, we are going to change our layout to horizontal and set it to auto and make sure that it's centered. All right, so now it's set to auto. We want to group this again and I want to activate auto layout again. And the reason for that is because we do need that 20 so that we can move it away from the side, but we also want to change this to full. And once we've done that, I want to open up this row. And with the row, we also want to make sure we get full. Now that we've done that, the next step is we're going to duplicate seat and we are going to go for class. So we want to say class and then business. So changing seat to class, and we're going to change this to business. Oh, that is super strange. So I'm just going to quickly fix that up. There we go. One thing I do want to do though is I do want to increase our gap just a slight bit, maybe change it to 8. And the same with this one, we are going to do the same. We're going to change this one to 8 as well. Okay, so with that all done, the last step here is we do want to set this to full. And the same with this one, I do want to set this one to full as well. Now, because we are using auto, we won't be able to change this right here, but now we can just literally go and play with it like that. And you'll notice that it's not going to be auto anymore. It's going to change the gap to an actual variable, which is fine. This is exactly what I want. Last step here, I just want to make the alignment left. Let's have a look at it. That looks pretty good. I like that. That is definitely what I wanted. I'm just going to decrease that gap just a tiny bit, maybe change it to 6. And let's have a look. That looks pretty good. That's kind of where I want it to be. Now, one small thing I do want to do, I don't want this to be uppercase. I do want this to be title case. So we're just going to rename that. We're just going to spell it out again because I do feel like that would look a little better. Yeah, that looks much better. Okay, so before we finish this off, I do feel like I want to increase the spacing again. I know I set it to 12, but let's set it to 20 so it matches the sides. So I'm going to go and change the 12 to 20. Let's have a quick peek. And that looks pretty good. All right, next step, we do want to add these items as well. So again, we can reuse our gate to achieve this. So I'm going to take our gate and we're going to copy it. We're going to navigate to our inner group, which in this case, it says outer input. Let's change that. I'm just going to say inner ticket for that matter. And this one that says bottom half, let's just change that one to ticket. That makes a little bit more sense. So with our gate copied, we are going to drop it in our ticket. So I'm going to paste it right there. And we want to make sure that it is still within inner ticket. So I'm going to drag it into inner ticket. We're going to take the gate and just move it right to the bottom. And once it's moved to the bottom, we're going to group it again because now we want to create that effect where we have the padding on the left and right. And now that we've done that, we can start by changing our actual layout to horizontal because we are going to move on a horizontal axis here. With that done, now we can duplicate our gate and it's going to move it to the side. Now, before we do that, we do want to change it to flight and whatever that is. So we're going to say and change gate to flight. And we're going to make up the flight. So I'm just using JCB because that's my channel name. And we're going to say 112 or 122 for that matter. Maybe that looks a little better. Now with that done, I just want to change the alignment. So the alignment needs to be left. And once that's left, we have that done, which looks pretty good. The next one is the date. So we want to change this one to date. So I'm going to change gate to date. And I think I went for 6. Yeah, I started with 6. I'm just going to highlight everything 6 APR. And that looks good. And then we went with boarding. So boarding is the next one. That is our favorite part of flying, is always boarding. I think after security, we all love the boarding part, which I am being sarcastic, of course. I don't really like any of that. Now that we have boarding here, we're going to add a time to it. So 6:21 is the one I went for. So we're just going to change this to 6:21. Did I add AM or PM? Let's just have a quick look. No, I did not. I left it just as is, which is fine. We can do it just like that. Alignment, I'm going to set to the left. And the last one is the zone. So we're going to create a zone as well. Take this one, duplicate it, change boarding to zone, and we're going to change it to zone 1, which is my favorite one. This is definitely a most favorite one. I do not like not being number 1. All right, now that that's all done, we are going to take this frame and we are going to change it to auto, and we are going to change it to fill, and it's going to nicely tuck it in for how we want it. Now, one thing I do want to change though is I want the date to be left aligned and not right aligned. So we're going to select that. And we're going to set it to left. So perfect. There we go. That looks pretty good. Let's have a quick look. That looks really, really good. I like where we are going with this. All right. So the next step is we do want to add this lines again. Now, when we move to the next chapter, or when we're going to do the next chapter, is we're going to fine tune a few things here because these dots are looking great, but it can look much better. So with that said, let's take the line, let's duplicate it and move it to the bottom. And now with that done, we're going to add the boarding pass or the QR code. And by the way, scan the QR code. Tell me in the comments where the QR code goes. I would love to see if you guys can figure that one out. All right, so we are gonna add boarding pass, and we're gonna do that by just duplicating a text that we already have. So I'm just gonna take this one, and we're gonna move back to the inner ticket. We're gonna drop it in there, and I'm going to rename it, and we're just gonna say boarding pass. I really do like the font size on this one, so I think we're good with that. But I wanna group it and create an auto layout, and we are going to make sure that hug is set to fill, and we're gonna center align it. All right, so now that it's center aligned, I'm literally just gonna copy it because I did get this QR code online and I used Adobe to do it. That's why it's saying Adobe Express. I used Adobe to create this QR code. So we are going to copy it and we're just gonna drop it in here. And we're gonna make sure that I'm dropping it into inner text, and there we go. Last thing I do wanna do though, is I do wanna change this frame to an auto layout, and we wanna make sure that that auto layout is centered by going with the alignment center, but also changing it to full. I do not want full. Okay, full is not gonna work for us. Okay, so the alignment's not gonna work, which means that I'm gonna group it again, and we're gonna hit auto layout again and do center, and now we can do full and it should be good to go. Now, one thing, let's just have a look at it. That looks pretty good. I really, really like that. But one thing though is maybe add a bit of a background to it just so that we can see a difference between that and the background of our inner ticket, or our ticket for that matter. So let's add just a slight gray to it, just so that people can see. Okay, so nothing is happening here. And the reason for that is because I selected the wrong one. So we're gonna remove that full. And one thing we can do, instead of going for full, we can go for a stroke. And we can increase the stroke to kind of match what we were trying to do there. And we can just change this up, just change it to about there. I really like that. Let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. And there we go. We have our ticket. Now, one small thing I do want to add, one thing I want to change is the spacing here, just so that we can see the background a little bit more. To do that, I'm going to click on inner content, and we are going to increase that gap just so that we can get a better view of everything. So I'm going to put it till about there. Right there should be good. I'm just going to measure it real quick, and we have 22. So I'm just going to decrease it a little bit just so that we can have 25 so that it matches with everything. The next part of this video, the next chapter, we are going to wrap everything up. I am going to add a bit of shadows, and we are going to fine tune everything just so that this ticket and everything, both designs, this one and the previous one, just looks better overall. So make sure to stick around. Okay, so this is the last chapter, and in this chapter, we are gonna fine tune everything. We're gonna add a bit of shadows, and I'm gonna show you an extra feature, an extra trick that I've kind of learned over the years that will make this design, specifically the ticket, look 10 times better than it currently is. So let's just quickly review before we jump into this. We essentially created this ticket. We do have our QR code. By the way, make sure to scan that QR code and drop in the comments where that QR code goes to. And we also have this. So in this chapter or in the last part of this video, we're gonna fine tune this and we're just gonna make everything look 10 times better. We're gonna bring in some three-dimensionality and just make everything great. All right, so first things first, let's work on this ticket. This is probably gonna be the hardest part to do. And we essentially want to take these dots. So if we look at this again, look at the prototype, I want these dots to basically look like it is a cutout of the ticket itself. Now it just looks like a bunch of dots or a line with a bunch of dashes. So first things first, we need to go and create that three-dimensional effect. Okay, on the left-hand side, let's minimize all of our layers or all of our groups so that we can start from the top. So I want to work in inner ticket. So in that group, I want to take the rectangle tool and we're just going to drag it on to the artboard or onto the frame, and to make sure that it's within our auto layout group. Next, I want to take the width and I want it to full content. Now, here's where things get tricky. First things first, I do want to change this to absolute. And once it's absolute, we are going to drag it right to the top and we're going to basically zoom out here and I'm going to drag it to way to the bottom. Now just give me a sec, I'm going to do that and we're just going to drag it right here. And now we have a absolute rectangle that is basically on top. The next step is we're going to right click and we're going to say send to back. And essentially we are going to take this and now we are going to combine this with our line tool. Now to do that, we are going to select the line. In this case, we're going to select both of them, as well as we're going to select this rectangle in the background. Once we've done that, we're going to click on the Boolean groups and we are going to say exclude selection. Now, when you do that, it kind of shifts everything to the bottom. And it also changed the background color. So I'm going to change the background color back to white and we're going to move everything to the top again. But one thing you're going to notice when you do that, it creates this exclude group in the layer section, but it disables that absolute positioning. So we want to enable it again. So on the right hand side, let's click on that absolute positioning. And now we have a little bit more freedom. So I want to change this 25 to 0. So it's right at the top. Now, there's a couple of things, and this is where it gets really, really tricky, is we want to make sure that everything blends in perfectly. Now, to do that, we're going to click on inner ticket, and we are going to get rid of the background. Now, what we have here is you can see that it is cutting it out, which is kind of what we want, but it's not 100% there yet. So right-clicking on this, we're going to send it to the back. And once we've sent it to the back, and now you can see that we do have this line right here that is cutting out. So it kind of looks good, but it looks like it shifted my other line. So we got to figure out what's going on. Now, one thing I do want to do though, is I want to select this and just double check. Okay, it is working the way it should be. I think what's happening here is that it doesn't look as prominent as the top one. Why? Because of the background. But once we add a shadow to this, it's going to look good. All right, so with that said, we're going to need to fine tune a few things here because it's not 100%. So first things first, I just want to check something. I want to select the first line and I want to hold an Alt and see, okay, we do have 25 on that. That is good. That's exactly what we want. But now I want to add a cutout on the left and the right hand side. So I'm going to take the ellipse tool, the circular tool, and we are going to drop it in. So we're just going to drop it in. I want it to be 12 in total. And one thing is it's not going to drop it in the exclude, which is fine. So we're just going to drag it in there. And now we're just going to move it about. Now, this is where you got to be careful. I normally use the keyboard shortcut key, so up arrow, left arrow, down arrow, to kind of move it about, because if you move it with the mouse, it can sometimes move it outside of that exclude. Okay, so now that we've done that, the next step is we need to unionize these two together, because when you look at it, it is overlapping each other, which is not what we want. So before we actually go and unionize these two together, there's one thing that we do need to do, and it's very finicky. So you got to make sure you do it 100%. So I'm going to drag this ellipse more to the right. And same with the line tool. I am going to decrease the line tool to about there. Once you've done that, you're going to select the ellipse and the line, and you're going to unionize them together. When you've unionized them together, you're going to take this line and you're going to drag it to about there. And there you go. It is unionized, so that looks pretty good. The next step here is I want to take the entire union and we want to drag it to the left till about center so that the circle or the ellipse is exactly centered of the edge of our background, which in this case, our background is that rectangle. The next step though, is you're going to see that little line there, which is not what we want. So to get past that, we're going to take this exclude group, we're going to group it again, and we're going to change it to a frame. Now, once you've changed it to a frame, you can basically select it and we're going to increase it a little bit so that it basically cuts away that white. So essentially we have that clip content, and doing that, we are cutting away that piece. Now we're going to do the same for the left-hand side. So opening up this again, opening up exclude and opening up union, we are essentially going to duplicate our little circle and we're going to move it to the right. So I am holding an Alt and we're just going to drag it to the right and we're just going to put it right there. Perfect. So it looks like it's not doing that same thing that it did on the left-hand side with that little line. So that's perfect. We don't need to worry about that. So I'm just going to drag it till about there. And I'm going to take my line and I'm just going to increase it a little bit. I also want to make sure that everything is 0 when it comes to the rotation, because sometimes when you do that, or when you do this, the line does get rotated. Okay, perfect. So now we have that effect. So if we go and look at the view, we can see that it looks like a ticket that's being cut out. Okay, so now that this line is done, we need to do the next one. Now, you would think that we can just take these little ellipse, we can duplicate it and move it down, but I found it very cumbersome if you do it that way. I find it very frustrating. So you're better off just creating own new circular ellipse for the bottom line. So let's zoom into this line right here. I am going to minimize this union. We're going to select this line. I'm going to create a new ellipse. We're going to make sure that it's the same as the previous one. So we're going to make sure that it's 12 and we're going to drag it again about there. We're going to take the line and we just want to make the line smaller just so that they don't touch each other. Want to make sure that you avoid that at all costs. Now, notice that my ellipse is not an exclude, so I'm just going to drag it into the exclude. With that, we're going to select both the line and the ellipse, and we're going to unionize it once again. Now that it's unionized, we can start moving it about. So I'm going to take this and we're going to use my arrow keys and we're going to move it to right there. And the same with the line. I'm going to extend the line so that it goes into our actual circle. Okay, perfect. We have that done. Now we just have to do the right-hand side. Now this one we can duplicate. I find that that doesn't give us any issues. So I'm just gonna drag it over to the right and we're gonna zoom in here and just fine tune it. And there we go. We have our realistic looking ticket. But now we got to do a little bit of fine tuning. And one of it obviously is the spacing. So we do need to fine tune the spacing here. Everything kind of shifted up. Why? Because we moved it out of the auto layout. So we got to work around that. Okay, so to do that, we are going to zoom in. We're going to start from the top. I'm going to take our first one, which is inner content, as well as the container. I'm just quickly having a look at how we're going to do this. And I think the best way to do this is we're going to need to regroup this again. So to start off with, I am going to take inner content and container, and we're going to group those two together and activate auto layout again. And with that done, now we can increase the gap so that it matches. So the padding or the gap that we are trying to achieve here is 25. Now, in this state of our design, I don't think we can actually use Alt to check what our gap is between that and the line. So the best way to do this, and I know this can sometimes be tedious, is you want to take a rectangle and we are just going to set the rectangle height to 25. And we're going to use this as a form of measurement. Okay, so I'm using this as a form of measurement. So the rectangle, again, I'm using as a form of measurements, very old school. But in this case, because we're getting past Figma's capabilities now, and because we're going super custom, this might be the only way to do it. So we can use this to drag it around. And here I can see that we have 25, which is kind of expected, but here it is not 100% 25 yet. So I'm going to take this exclude and we're going to use our scale and we're just going to move it down a little bit. So I am going to just drag this a little bit just so that we can see if we can move it about. It looks like we can't do it that way, but other way we can be able to do it is by changing the height of it. And there we go. I can see that we have now matched our rectangle, which is 25, and everything looks good. It's not stretched and everything is still looking like it's supposed to, which is perfect. All right, so now with that done, we are going to use our form of measurement right here. And I'm just going to select it again, and we're just going to match the bottom part with that as well. So to do that, we are going to put it right there. And we are going to go to that frame that we created, go out of this scale tool, go back to move, and now we can move this guy down so that it matches. So going back, we can see that it properly matches now as well, which is really, really cool. Now that we've done that, we would need to do the same for the bottom as well. Okay, so to do that, we are going to select our rectangle, our little measurement right here, and now it is stuck. And we're just going to move it down until about here. And the idea here is that we would need to try and match this. So I am going to go into the excludes, and we are going to look for this union, and I'm just going to move it up to about there. Perfect. So now that we have that, we can basically put it at the bottom, and we're going to do the matching as well. So I am going to minimize my exclude, and it's getting pretty complicated. I know it's getting super complicated. I'm going to select the boarding pass as well as our flight date and boarding. We're going to group these two together, activate auto layout, and now we can increase that gap. And we want to essentially make sure that the gap and the boarding pass essentially matches with our little measurement tool here. So I'm just going to put it right there. And let's go back to this one and decrease the gap just a slight bit. And there we go. We have a perfect alignment and spacing. So when we go into the design itself, or when we preview it, you can see that that looks pretty good. All right, so what we want to do is we want to select inner ticket again. So minimize that. So that is just right below the actual ticket. And one thing I notice here is that we have set it to hug, which is fine, but for some reason it is now a little bigger than it's supposed to. So I am going to set it to fixed, and we're just going to manually change this. So changing it to fixed, and then we are going to decrease that until we get to a desired spot, which I believe is kind of right there. There we go. So looking at the preview, we can see, hey, that really looks cool. That looks like an actual ticket, which I really like. Perfect. So now with this all done, and the reason why we did that is because now we are going to add a shadow to our background. So selecting the frame 36, we're going to change or rename this. I'm just going to call it background. We are going to add a shadow to it. Now selecting our plugins, one I really like to use is called Shadow Maker. I feel like it's a great one. And if you've been following me, you know that I always like to use this one. And we are going to run into some issues. And the issues we're going to run into is the actual clip that we have on the inner ticket. So I'm going to disable this clip. And you can see now we can see the shadow, but we're running into a different issue now. Is the main issue is now we can see this again, which is not ideal. I'm pretty sure we're going to see it at the top. Yeah, we're going to see it at the top as well. So it's kind of like one step forward and 10 steps back, but I'll show you a different way of how to fix that. So let's go and add the shadow. So I'm going to add it to about there. And this is kind of a tedious process. So I've just noticed that we've lost our radius as well. So I think this might not be a perfect solution. So let's cancel this and go back to inner ticket and activate the clip again. And let's add the background or the shadow to the clip itself. That would also give us what we are looking for. So now I've added it to the inner ticket and basically saved us a lot of time. And now with that done, I just want to decrease the opacity on this thing. That's way, way too much. So around about there, let's have a quick look and see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. Now that we've done that, we are going to hit apply, and you'll see that this plugin is adding all of those shadows. So it really saves a lot of time for us, which is pretty good. So now we have a good looking ticket. So just having a quick look here, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so let's add a little bit of shadow to the left-hand side as well, just kind of fine tune everything as well. So going back to it, going to the search part, one thing I do want to do is kind of apply a same shadow to this box right here. So we want to select that box, which is going to be outer input. And again, we're going to open up shadow, and we're just going to add a little bit of a shadow here, maybe to that direction, or maybe to this direction. Just kind of play around with it. I think it looks good like this. And then we got to decrease our opacity and decrease our distance because I don't want it to be that big. So around about there, I think is a good start. And I want to maybe just make it a little lighter as well. So maybe about till there looks good. You don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to go overboard with the shadows. You just want to stick to basics when it comes to shadows. Now going back, that looks pretty good to me. It's very subtle. It's not a lot, but it's still enough so that we can see a difference, which at the end of the day is very important. With shadows, you don't want to overdo it. You want to stick to the basics. Okay, so now that we've added a little bit of a shadow effect to this box, I want to do the same for these boxes as well. First things first, we want to select them and make sure that you select them individually. And we are going to select that shadow maker again, and we are going to play around with it. Now, we still have some clip content here. So I just want to click on ticket and make sure that we deactivate that. And let's go back to it. And I'm just going to hit cancel here because I want to make sure that I add it to the right one. So selecting stat number 1. So let's do this one individually because I think that if you do both with this plugin, it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. So let's select the first one and I want it to be about there. Bring back the distance, dial back the distance, dial back the opacity, and I want it to be exactly like that. So that looks perfect. Now we're going to scroll down to the shadows so we can see the shadows on the right-hand side. And what I want to do now is I want to create a style of this. So we're just going to call it drop shadow, and we can then reuse this style on this one as well. So in effect, we're going to hit that, and it's also going to create that drop shadow effect. So going back to our view here, going back to the play, we can see it's a little bit more of a three-dimensional effect, which is what design is all about. It's all about those small little things. So next, I want to create a selection effect on flights because we are in the flight section of this app. I feel like we need to tell the user, hey, you are in this part, you are in the flights part of this app. So first things first, I'm going to take our color that we created here, and we are going to create a primary color of this. So I'm just going to call it primary so that we can reuse it. And we're going to scroll up and we're going to select this flight one. We're going to change this to that color. So now we have that selection. So now it is selected. Next, I want to fine tune our background image a little bit. So I want to make our gradient a little darker. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a darkness just so that we can have a more three-dimensional effect to this. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. And the other thing I want to do is I want to bring in some blue here as well. Super black, just sometimes it doesn't look that great. So let's have a look at that. Now that we've done that, you'll notice that the profile picture does pop a little bit more, which is good. I like that. And I want to see how it will look like if we change this text to white. Might not look good, but hey, let's see if it looks different. So I'm going to change this to white, that one too, and let's see how that looks like. Honestly, I am more a fan of the dark, so I'm going to go revert back to it. But one thing I noticed though, is that the text, all these texts are still super black. So we don't want that. We definitely don't want that at all. So quickly changing that font color, we're going to change it to that. Let's have a look at that now. I really do like that. That looks good. Now that we've done this, one thing I do find is I find that this return flight, single flight and multi-city, I feel like we should maybe move it into this box. So let's see how that would look like. Again, that's what design is all about, right? It's about playing around and seeing how everything looks like. So let's take this, we're going to drag it in here. And I just want to make sure we do that correctly because sometimes, as you can see, it doesn't do what we want it to do. So I'm rather going to do it from this end. So bottom half, we're going to open up bottom half. We're going to open up and make sure we're opening up the right one, which I think is this outer input. And we are going to put it in right there. So I'm going to take this and drag it in right there. Okay, so now that we've dragged it into bottom half, I also want to drag it into the outer input. So just dragging it in there. Okay, so now that it's in the outer input, I really like that. I like the simplicity of this. One thing I do want to do is remove the padding so it's a little bit more flush. Let's reuse our color. Let's see how that's going to look like. It might be too much, but let's see how it looks like. It actually doesn't look that bad. It looks pretty good. One thing I do want to do though is see if I want to change this text to white. It might conflict with the top. Yeah, it definitely does. But let's change it back to dark. And one thing we can do now, because we have a little bit of extra space, we can add a bit of distance between this. So going back to the wireframe, we do have more space here. So we can definitely play around with adding more space. So minimize everything here. We are going to take this and we're going to increase this quite a significant amount. So let's try 48 and see how that looks like. Now, we want to make sure that this doesn't break anything. And when we look at our design, it did shift our menu down a little bit, which is fine. We can kind of fine tune that. What I do want to do with this menu though, is I wonder if we should make this absolute. So it's just easier to manage. And I think that might be the solution for us. So we're just going to fine tune, move that up a little bit. And now, because it's absolute, that looks pretty good, by the way. Now that it's absolute, things can move about and it's not going to affect our menu. By the way, while we add the menu, let's add a little bit of a shadow to it. So open up Shadow Maker and we're going to change and put it about there. Obviously, not that big of a distance. Literally, we're just going to do that. Bring down the opacity just so that's a little bit of a break right there. So let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. Now, one thing you're going to notice with Figma, when you look in the actual play mode, I call it the play mode, which is the preview mode, you will see sometimes that shadows do look a little bit pixelated. That's fine though, because obviously once you start developing this, once we actually go to this part where the development part is, you'll see that it shows the right code there. So that should be all good to go. All right, so with that all said, I think one thing I do want to do is also add just a bit of shadows to these icons. Just want to make sure that we add some three-dimensionality to this. So going to effects, let's add the shadow that we had. That was a little too light, so I'm going to get rid of that. And let's add a shadow effect here. I just want to see, yeah, it only applies it to the one, and that's the downside of this plugin that I always use. So I'm just going to move it to about there. We're going to make it a little darker just so it pops a little bit more, just a little bit more. I don't want it to be too much, just about there. And we're going to hit apply. Perfect. Now that we have that, we can add that as another effect style. So I'm going to call it drop shadow 2. And we can reuse that to the other ones as well. So selecting the other ones and going to effect and adding that drop, we can see that we have that there now as well. So let's have a look at that. That looks really good. Again, you can always play around with everything. One thing I do want to do, the last step before we wrap this up, is I don't like this return flight, single flight, multi-city. I feel like there's too much orange now. So let's swap this out. Let's take this. And we are going to detach it, disable it. We are going to change this to semi-bold. Let's change the actual font to that color and see how that looks like. That looks really good. I really like that. Last thing is I just want to get rid of this padding just because I feel like we don't really need it. If we're going to do that, we want to make sure everything is centered. So it is like that. And last but not least, we're probably going to need to do it for the rest of them as well. We're going to need to get rid of that padding. There we go. Now that we've got rid of that padding, we just want to add the overall padding to it. So I just want to add 12. Let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. One thing though is it's not centered. So this one should be on the right. So that's the last little step here that we can do. The way to fix this, the way to solve this, the easiest way is we're going to change the full to hug, change this one to hug as well, and change this one to hug as well. Once that's done, you're going to go to row and we are going to change this to auto. And there we go. We have that done. The last step, last little bit here, just add a little bit of padding here. Just bring it in a slight bit, just so it looks a little better. With that, that looks pretty good. All right, so we've basically built an entire mobile app. We designed it. It looks cool. I really like this ticket effect that we created. Looks really sharp. And we have a QR code here. And now one thing I'm going to leave this with you is try and use the prototype tool and put this together. Now, again, I have put this on the Figma community. You can duplicate this, you can fork this. And again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. I do appreciate that. I do post videos like this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And with that, check you later.